The Imperial Commissariat emerged from the crucible of necessity during humanity's greatest expansion across the galaxy, born from the pragmatic mind of Malcador the Sigillite as the Great Crusade reached its zenith. As the Emperor's armies pushed ever outward into the darkness between stars, conquering world after world in his name, the sheer scale of the undertaking began to reveal fundamental weaknesses in the command structure of the Imperial war machine. Local commanders, separated by vast distances from Terra and operating with increasing autonomy, began to exhibit troubling signs of independence that threatened the unity of purpose essential to the Crusade's success. Malcador, serving as the Emperor's closest advisor in region of Terra, recognized that traditional military hierarchies alone could not maintain the ideological purity and unwavering loyalty required for such an unprecedented campaign of galactic conquest. The Sigillite had witnessed firsthand how distance and time could erode even the strongest bonds of fealty, and he understood that the Imperial truth required constant reinforcement through dedicated agents embedded within every level of the military apparatus. The solution he proposed to the Council of Terra was elegant in its simplicity, yet revolutionary in its implications. A parallel chain of command dedicated solely to maintaining morale, discipline, and absolute loyalty to the throne of Terra. The first Commissars were drawn from the ranks of the most fanatically loyal officers within the Imperial Army, individuals whose devotion to the Emperor's vision had been tested in the fires of compliance actions across dozens of worlds. These early appointees underwent intensive indoctrination on Terra itself, studying not only military tactics and imperial law, but also the philosophical underpinnings of the imperial truth. They learned to recognize the subtle signs of wavering faith, the dangerous whispers of doubt that could spread through a regiment like a plague, and the methods by which such contamination could be excised with surgical precision. The organizational framework established by Malcador placed the Commissariat under the direct authority of the Council of Terra, ensuring that these political officers remained independent from the military commanders they were assigned to monitor. This separation of authority created a deliberate tension within imperial forces, preventing the consolidation of power that might lead to rebellion, while ensuring that multiple perspectives informed critical decisions. Commissars reported through their own chain of command, their assessments and recommendations flowing back to Terra through channels entirely separate from standard military communications. During the Great Crusade's later phases, as the expeditionary fleets pushed deeper into uncharted space, Commissars became an increasingly common sight aboard imperial vessels and within army regiments. Their distinctive uniforms, typically featuring the peaked caps and long coats that would become synonymous with their office, marked them as representatives of Terra's will among forces that might not see their homeworld for decades. The psychological impact of their presence extended far beyond their actual numbers, as every soldier understood that the Emperor's eyes were upon them through these watchful guardians of loyalty. The Horus Heresy transformed the Commissariat from a tool of ideological enforcement into an instrument of survival. As half the Space Marine legions turned traitor and vast swathes of the Imperial Army followed their lead, Commissars found themselves on the front lines of a war for the very soul of humanity. Those who remained loyal to the throne became crucial figures in identifying and purging traitor elements within their assigned units, often at tremendous personal cost. The betrayal at Istvan III demonstrated the prescience of Malcador's original vision, as Commissars attached to loyalist forces provided early warning of the corruption spreading through the ranks. Throughout the 7 years of civil war that followed, the Commissariat evolved rapidly to meet the changing demands of a galaxy in flames. Emergency protocols granted Commissars expanded authority to execute summary judgment on suspected traitors, powers that would have been unthinkable during the optimistic days of the Great Crusade. The institution's independence from local command structures proved invaluable as entire sectors fell to chaos, allowing loyal Commissars to maintain communication with Terra and coordinate resistance efforts even when cut off from their parent formations. The aftermath of the heresy saw the Commissariat undergo significant reorganization as the newly formed Imperium of Man grappled with the reality of permanent warfare. The optimistic imperial truth gave way to the harsh doctrines of the imperial cult, and commissars adapted their methods accordingly. No longer were they simply guardians of secular loyalty. They became shepherds of faith, ensuring that the emperor's divine will was understood and obeyed throughout the military hierarchy. The integration of the commissariat into the Adeptus Munitorum during the administrative reforms of the early 31st millennium established the bureaucratic framework that would endure for 10,000 years. This massive reorganization created clear lines of authority and supply while maintaining the political independence that made commissars effective. The Adeptus Munitorum assumed responsibility for the training, equipping, and deployment of commissars across the Imperium, but their loyalty remained fixed upon the Golden Throne rather than any earthly superior. Under this new system, commissar training facilities were established on dozens of worlds across the Imperium, each one a fortress monastery dedicated to producing the next generation of political officers. These institutions, known as Schola Progenium facilities, recruited primarily from the orphaned children of imperial servants who had died in service to the throne. The curriculum combined rigorous military training with intensive theological instruction, creating graduates who understood both the art of war and the necessity of absolute faith. The rank structure that emerged from these reforms reflected the complex nature of the commissar's role within imperial society. Regimental commissars formed the backbone of the institution, embedded within individual regiments of the Imperial Guard, where they served as both inspirational leaders and instruments of discipline. These officers typically held the rank of captain or major within the regimental structure, granting them sufficient authority to influence tactical decisions while remaining subordinate to the commanding officer in purely military matters. The relationship between regimental commissars and their assigned units required delicate navigation of competing loyalties and expectations. Effective commissars learned to balance their role as enforcers of imperial law with the practical necessities of maintaining unit cohesion and morale. The most successful among them became beloved figures within their regiments, respected for their courage under fire and their willingness to share the hardships of common soldiers. Others maintained their authority through fear alone, relying on the power of summary execution to compel obedience. Senior commissars represented the next tier of the hierarchy, typically responsible for overseeing multiple regiments or entire battle groups. These officers possessed decades of experience in the field and had demonstrated exceptional skill in both combat leadership and political maneuvering. Senior commissars often served as advisors to high-ranking military commanders, their counsel carrying weight derived from years of observing the ebb and flow of imperial warfare across multiple theaters of operation. The appointment to senior commissar rank required not only proven competence, but also the political acumen necessary to navigate the complex web of relationships that characterized imperial high command. These officers frequently found themselves mediating disputes between rival commanders, investigating allegations of corruption or incompetence, and ensuring that strategic objectives aligned with imperial policy. Their reports carried significant weight within the Adeptus Munitorum hierarchy, capable of making or breaking the careers of generals and admirals across the galaxy. Lord Commissars occupied the apex of the institutional pyramid, wielding authority that extended across entire sectors and encompassing thousands of regiments. These legendary figures had typically served for centuries, their names becoming synonymous with victory and unwavering loyalty to the throne. Lord Commissars possessed the authority to requisition entire fleets, override the decisions of planetary governors, and coordinate multi-system military campaigns in the Emperor's name. The selection process for Lord Commissar rank remained shrouded in secrecy, involving consultations between the highest levels of the Adeptus Munitorum and representatives of the Adeptus Terra. Candidates underwent extensive investigation by the Inquisition and other imperial agencies, ensuring that no trace of corruption or divided loyalty could compromise their fitness for such elevated responsibility. The few who achieved this rank became living legends within the commissariat, their methods studied and emulated by generations of junior officers. The independence of the commissariat from local military hierarchies created a parallel power structure that permeated every level of imperial armed forces. This deliberate redundancy served multiple purposes beyond simple oversight, creating alternative channels of communication and command that could function even when primary military leadership was compromised. During planetary rebellions or chaos incursions, loyal commissars often found themselves serving as rallying points for resistance efforts, their authority deriving directly from Terra rather than local sources that might be corrupted or destroyed. The training regimen for prospective commissars emphasized this independence through careful instruction in imperial law, military regulations, and the complex web of authorities that governed the Imperium's vast bureaucracy. Students learned to navigate between competing jurisdictions and conflicting orders, always maintaining their primary loyalty to the Emperor while working within the practical constraints of military necessity. This education produced officers capable of making difficult decisions under extreme pressure, confident in their authority, and prepared to accept the consequences of their actions. The logistical support network that sustained the commissariat across the galaxy represented one of the Adeptus Munitorum's most complex undertakings. Commissars required specialized equipment, from their distinctive uniforms and ceremonial weapons to the sophisticated communication devices that maintained their connection to higher authority. The production and distribution of these materials demanded coordination across thousands of worlds, each contributing specific components to the overall system. The Schola Progenium facilities scattered across the Imperium stand as monuments to calculated indoctrination, their Gothic spires and reinforced walls housing the most comprehensive program of ideological conditioning ever devised by human minds. These institutions, established in the wake of the Horus Heresy's devastating revelations about the fragility of loyalty, represent the Imperium's systematic approach to creating unshakable servants of the Golden Throne. Within their hallowed halls, the orphaned children of Imperial servants undergo a transformation that strips away individual identity and replaces it with absolute dedication to the Emperor's will. The recruitment process for the Schola Progenium operates with ruthless efficiency across every world of the Imperium, targeting a specific demographic that has proven most susceptible to complete indoctrination. Priority selection focuses on the orphaned children of Imperial Guard officers, Navy personnel, commissars, arbites, and other servants of the throne who died in active service to the Emperor. These children, typically between the ages of 6 and 10, are identified through meticulous records maintained by the Adeptus Munitorum and other Imperial agencies. The death of a parent in Imperial service creates both opportunity and necessity. The child becomes a ward of the Imperium, while their bloodline carries the genetic markers of proven loyalty. Adeptus Administratum scribes maintain detailed genealogical records extending back generations, cross-referencing family histories with service records to identify optimal candidates. Children whose lineages show multiple generations of faithful service receive highest priority, as do those whose parents died heroically defending Imperial interests. The offspring of decorated veterans, particularly those who received commendations for exceptional courage or sacrifice, are marked for immediate recruitment regardless of their current circumstances. Local commissars and arbites conduct the actual collection process, arriving at orphanages, foster homes, or surviving family members with writs of conscription bearing the seal of the Adeptus Terra. These documents carry absolute authority, overriding any local custody arrangements or adoption proceedings. The children are informed that their recruitment represents the highest honor the Imperium can bestow, that they have been chosen to serve the Emperor directly in ways their deceased parents could never have imagined. Resistance from surviving relatives or guardians is met with swift correction, often involving charges of obstructing Imperial recruitment or questioning the Emperor's will. Transportation to Schola Progenium facilities occurs aboard dedicated vessels of the Imperial Navy, black-hulled transports whose holds are fitted with dormitories designed to house hundreds of recruits simultaneously. The journey itself begins the indoctrination process, as children are separated from any remaining personal possessions and issued standardized clothing bearing the aquila. Shipboard routine follows strict schedules of prayer, physical exercise, and preliminary instruction in imperial doctrine, establishing patterns that will define their existence for the next decade. Upon arrival at their assigned facility, recruits undergo comprehensive medical and psychological evaluation designed to identify both physical capabilities and mental predispositions. Medici examine each child for genetic abnormalities, signs of mutation, or hereditary weaknesses that might compromise their future service. Those found lacking are typically redirected to less demanding roles within the imperial bureaucracy, or in cases of serious deficiency, quietly eliminated to prevent contamination of the program. The psychological assessment proves equally rigorous, employing techniques developed over millennia of studying human behavior under extreme stress. Trained interrogators probe the children's memories for signs of corruption, heretical influence, or excessive attachment to their former lives. Those who demonstrate inappropriate emotional responses to questions about loyalty, duty, or sacrifice face immediate remedial conditioning or removal from the program. The evaluation process can extend for weeks, during which recruits live in sterile dormitories under constant observation. The indoctrination curriculum that follows represents the culmination of 10,000 years of refinement in the art of mental conditioning. The Imperial Creed forms the foundation of all instruction, beginning with basic catechisms that must be memorized perfectly before advancing to more complex theological concepts. Students learn that the Emperor is not merely their ruler but their divine father, that his will supersedes all other considerations, including family bonds, personal desires, or individual survival. The concept of the Emperor's divine nature is reinforced through daily prayer sessions, ritual observances, and constant repetition of sacred texts. Military doctrine receives equal emphasis, with students studying the organizational structure of imperial forces, the chain of command, and the sacred duty of obedience to legitimate authority. They learn to recognize the insignia of different regiments, the proper protocols for addressing officers of various ranks, and the circumstances under which summary execution becomes not only permissible but mandatory. Case studies drawn from actual battlefield situations illustrate the consequences of hesitation, cowardice, or divided loyalty, with particular attention paid to incidents where swift action by commissars prevented larger disasters. The psychological conditioning component of the curriculum employs sophisticated techniques designed to reshape fundamental aspects of personality and emotional response. Students undergo regular sessions with specially trained ministorum priests who combine theological instruction with subtle forms of mental manipulation. These sessions gradually erode individual identity while strengthening identification with imperial institutions and values. Students learn to suppress personal emotions in favor of righteous anger against the Emperor's enemies, to find satisfaction in duty rather than personal achievement, and to view their own lives as expendable resources in service to the greater cause. Loyalty assessment occurs continuously throughout the program, employing both overt testing and covert observation to identify students whose commitment might waver under pressure. Fellow students are encouraged to report any signs of doubt, questioning of imperial doctrine, or excessive attachment to pre-recruitment memories. These reports are carefully investigated by facility staff, with confirmed cases of insufficient loyalty resulting in immediate remedial action or termination from the program. The physical training regimen transforms children into hardened warriors capable of surviving the galaxy's most hostile environments. Combat instruction begins with basic hand-to-hand fighting techniques, emphasizing practical methods for disabling or killing opponents quickly and efficiently. Students learn to use improvised weapons, to fight in darkness or confined spaces, and to continue combat operations despite injury or exhaustion. The training deliberately inflicts pain and hardship, conditioning students to function effectively under extreme stress, while reinforcing the lesson that personal comfort is irrelevant to imperial service. Marksmanship training receives particular attention, as the ability to deliver precise fire at critical moments often determines the success or failure of commissarial intervention. Students master the use of standard imperial weapons, including bolt pistols, las pistols, and plasma weapons, learning not only accuracy, but also the psychological impact of different weapon types. They study the art of the execution shot, practicing the precise placement of rounds that will instantly kill while serving as an example to witnesses. Advanced students learn to maintain and repair their weapons under field conditions, understanding that equipment failure at a crucial moment can compromise both mission success and personal survival. Close quarters fighting instruction encompasses both armed and unarmed combat, preparing students for situations where ranged weapons prove ineffective or inappropriate. They master the use of power weapons, chainswords, and other melee implements favored by commissars, learning to coordinate their attacks with supporting troops while maintaining situational awareness of the broader tactical picture. Training scenarios simulate the chaos of actual combat, with students required to make split-second decisions about when to engage enemies directly and when to focus on maintaining unit discipline. Survival training exposes students to the diverse environments they may encounter during their careers, from the frozen wastelands of ice worlds to the toxic atmospheres of industrial planets. They learn to construct shelter from available materials, to find or purify water sources, and to identify edible vegetation or wildlife. More importantly, they develop the mental resilience necessary to function effectively when cut off from supply lines or support, understanding that commissars must often operate independently for extended periods. Environmental conditioning includes exposure to extreme temperatures, toxic atmospheres, and high radiation environments under controlled conditions. Students wear basic protective gear while performing complex tasks, learning to maintain focus and dexterity despite physical discomfort. They practice combat maneuvers in zero gravity, underwater, and in the crushing gravity of high-mass worlds, developing the adaptability that allows commissars to function effectively regardless of planetary conditions. The curriculum also encompasses specialized skills that distinguish commissars from ordinary military officers. Students learn the art of inspirational oratory, practicing speeches designed to rally troops before battle or restore morale after defeat. They study the psychological principles underlying effective leadership, learning to read the mood of groups and individuals while projecting confidence and authority even in desperate situations. Advanced courses cover the detection of heretical influence, the identification of chaos corruption, and the proper procedures for dealing with suspected traitors or mutants. Administrative training ensures that graduates can navigate the complex bureaucracy of the imperial war machine. Students learn to prepare reports, requisition supplies, and coordinate with other imperial agencies while maintaining their independence from local command structures. They study imperial law and military regulations, developing the expertise necessary to distinguish between legitimate orders and potentially treasonous commands. This education includes extensive practice in conducting investigations, gathering evidence, and presenting findings to higher authorities. The graduation trials that conclude Schola Progenium training represent the final test of a student's fitness for commissarial service. These trials vary between facilities, but typically involve a combination of combat scenarios, leadership challenges, and moral tests designed to reveal any remaining weaknesses in character or conditioning. Students may be required to lead simulated military units through complex tactical situations while maintaining discipline and morale, demonstrating their ability to function as both warriors and political officers. The moral component of graduation trials often involves scenarios where students must choose between competing loyalties or make difficult decisions about the lives of subordinates. They might face situations where mercy conflicts with duty, where personal relationships threaten mission success, or where the greater good requires actions that would be considered atrocious in civilian society. These tests are designed to ensure that graduates will not hesitate when faced with similar dilemmas during actual service. Physical trials push students to their absolute limits, requiring them to complete complex missions while exhausted, injured, or under extreme stress. They must demonstrate proficiency with all standard commissarial weapons and equipment while operating in hostile environments with minimal support. The trials deliberately create conditions where failure seems inevitable, testing the student's ability to persevere through determination and faith rather than relying on favorable circumstances. Assignment protocols following successful graduation reflect the Imperium's careful consideration of individual strengths and the needs of different military formations. The most promising graduates receive assignment to elite regiments or critical theaters of operation where their skills can have maximum impact. Others are assigned to newly formed units where their presence will help establish proper discipline and loyalty from the outset. A select few are identified for advanced training, leading to specialized roles within the commissariat or other Adeptus organizations. The assignment process considers both the graduate's demonstrated abilities and the specific requirements of available positions. Students who excel in combat operations might be assigned to assault regiments or siege warfare units, while those with superior administrative skills could be placed with logistical formations or garrison troops. The psychological profile developed during training influences these decisions, ensuring that each commissar is placed in an environment where their particular strengths will prove most valuable. Some graduates demonstrate exceptional potential that warrants assignment to other branches of Imperial service. The Adeptus Archives recruit promising candidates for law enforcement roles on critical worlds, while the Officio Praefectus occasionally selects individuals for specialized intelligence or counterintelligence operations. The Inquisition maintains observers at major Schola Progenium facilities, identifying students whose unique combinations of skills and psychological traits make them suitable for inquisitorial service. The transition from Schola Progenium graduate to active commissar marks not merely a change in status, but a complete transformation in how these individuals interact with the physical world around them. The distinctive wargear and symbols of office that define a commissar serve multiple functions beyond mere practicality, creating a carefully orchestrated display of imperial authority that projects power across vast distances and diverse cultures. Every element of their equipment has been refined through 10 millennia of warfare, each component selected not only for its battlefield effectiveness, but for its psychological impact on both allies and enemies. The bolt pistol represents the most iconic element of commissarial armament, its distinctive profile immediately recognizable to any servant of the Imperium who has witnessed the Emperor's justice dispensed at close range. Unlike the mass-produced las pistols carried by common Imperial Guard officers, the Commissar's bolt pistol is typically a masterwork weapon crafted in the forges of Mars or other major manufacturing worlds. The weapon's ceramic plasteel construction incorporates intricate engravings of imperial eagles, skulls, and sacred texts, transforming a tool of war into a religious artifact that embodies the Emperor's wrath made manifest. The ammunition employed by these weapons further emphasizes their role as instruments of final judgment. Mass-reactive bolt rounds designed for anti-personnel use explode within the target's body cavity, ensuring that execution shots produce immediate and unmistakable results. The distinctive crack of a bolt pistol firing and the subsequent explosive detonation serve as audible confirmation of imperial justice, sounds that carry across battlefields and garrison courtyards alike. Commissars maintain their weapons with religious devotion, understanding that mechanical failure at a critical moment could undermine both their authority and their survival. The chainsword completes the traditional commissarial armament, its roaring teeth providing both practical cutting power and psychological intimidation that few other weapons can match. These weapons vary considerably in design and provenance, from standard pattern blades manufactured on Forge Worlds to ancient relics passed down through generations of commissars. The most prized examples incorporate power field generators that enhance their cutting ability while adding the distinctive blue-white glow that marks truly exceptional weapons. The sound of an activated chainsword represents one of the most effective tools in the Commissar's arsenal for maintaining discipline without actually shedding blood. The weapon's distinctive growl immediately focuses attention and conveys the imminent possibility of violence, often proving sufficient to restore order among wavering troops. Commissars practice extensively with these weapons, mastering not only their use in combat, but also their deployment as instruments of psychological warfare during inspections, disciplinary hearings, and morale-building speeches. The peaked cap worn by Commissars has evolved into perhaps the most recognizable symbol of imperial authority throughout the galaxy, its distinctive silhouette instantly identifiable, even at considerable distances. The cap's black leather construction features a rigid peak that casts shadows across the wearer's eyes, creating an aura of inscrutability that enhances the Commissar's psychological presence. The front of the cap displays the golden aquila, often crafted from actual precious metal and featuring intricate detailing that reflects the wearer's rank and service record. The cap's interior contains sophisticated communication equipment, including micro-vox units that allow discrete communication with other Imperial agents and data slates that display critical information about unit composition, standing orders, and tactical situations. Advanced models incorporate threat detection systems that alert the wearer to unusual energy signatures or biological anomalies that might indicate the presence of psychers, mutants, or other dangerous individuals. The cap serves as both symbol and practical tool, embodying the dual nature of commissarial authority. The greatcoat represents another essential element of commissarial regalia, its distinctive cut and coloration marking the wearer as a representative of terras, will regardless of local customs or military traditions. These garments are typically constructed from heavy fabric treated with protective chemicals that provide limited defense against environmental hazards while maintaining their ceremonial appearance. The coat's length varies according to local conditions and personal preference, but always extends below the knee to create an imposing silhouette that commands respect. Internal pockets within the greatcoat contain specialized equipment essential to commissarial duties. Concealed holsters allow for the discreet carry of backup weapons, while reinforced compartments protect sensitive documents and communication devices from damage during combat operations. Many coats incorporate subtle armor plating around vital areas, providing protection against small arms fire, without compromising the garment's ceremonial appearance. The collar features rank insignia and service medals that communicate the wearer's authority and experience to observant subordinates. The color scheme of commissarial uniforms follows strict regulations established by the Adeptus Militarum, with variations permitted only to accommodate specific environmental requirements or regimental traditions. The standard combination of black leather and dark fabric creates a somber appearance that emphasizes the serious nature of commissarial duties while providing practical advantages in terms of maintenance and concealment. Gold braiding and insignia provide necessary contrast while reinforcing the connection to imperial authority through their precious metal composition. Communication equipment represents a critical component of commissarial gear, enabling these officers to maintain contact with higher authority and coordinate responses to developing situations. Standard issue vox casters incorporate encryption systems that prevent unauthorized interception of sensitive communications, while emergency beacons allow commissars to summon immediate support when facing overwhelming opposition. Advanced models include direct links to orbital assets, permitting the coordination of bombardments or evacuation operations without relying on potentially compromised local command structures. The vox caster's external appearance deliberately mimics religious artifacts, with cases fashioned to resemble prayer books or sacred texts. This camouflage serves both practical and psychological purposes, concealing advanced technology from primitive populations while reinforcing the Commissar's role as a spiritual leader. The device's controls are designed for operation under combat conditions, with large buttons that can be manipulated while wearing gloves and tactile indicators that function in complete darkness. Field manuals carried by commissars contain condensed versions of imperial regulations, military doctrine, and procedural guidelines necessary for effective decision-making in isolated conditions. These volumes are printed on durable materials designed to survive extreme environmental conditions, with waterproof covers and reinforced bindings that resist damage from repeated handling. The content includes detailed instructions for conducting field executions, investigating suspected treason, and coordinating with other imperial agencies during complex operations. The manuals also contain reference materials covering the identification of alien species, recognition of chaos symbols and corruption, and protocols for dealing with psyker manifestations. Maps of local sectors, communication frequencies for imperial assets, and emergency procedures for various scenarios provide essential information that may not be available through electronic means. Many commissars annotate their manuals extensively, adding personal observations and lessons learned during their service careers. Portable shrine altars represent specialized equipment employed during formal executions and other ceremonial duties that require religious sanction. These devices unfold to create miniature temples, complete with sacred imagery, incense burners, and spaces for ritual implements. The shrine's presence transforms summary executions from mere disciplinary actions into religious ceremonies that reinforce imperial doctrine while providing spiritual comfort to witnesses. The altar's construction incorporates blessed materials from Terra and other sacred worlds, lending genuine spiritual authority to proceedings conducted in remote locations. Hidden compartments contain ceremonial weapons, sacred oils, and other items necessary for conducting proper rites according to imperial religious law. The device's compact design allows for rapid deployment during fluid tactical situations, ensuring that proper religious observances can be maintained even under combat conditions. Specialized equipment variations reflect the diverse environments and assignments that commissars encounter throughout their careers. Those assigned to void warfare operations carry modified gear designed for zero-gravity conditions, including magnetic clamps for weapons and equipment, sealed atmospheric systems, and communication devices capable of functioning in vacuum. Desert world assignments require different modifications, with cooling systems, sand filters, and solar collectors that maintain equipment function despite extreme environmental conditions. Commissars attached to Tempestus Science units receive access to advanced equipment that reflects both their elite status and the specialized nature of their assignments. Carapace armor provides enhanced protection while maintaining the mobility necessary for airborne operations, with integrated systems that monitor vital signs and battlefield conditions. Their weapons often incorporate superior targeting systems, enhanced ammunition feeds, and improved reliability under extreme conditions. The carapace armor worn by Tempestus Commissars features distinctive modifications that identify their role while providing practical advantages during high-intensity operations. Reinforced chest plates display enlarged Aquila symbols that remain visible even under combat conditions, while helmet modifications include enhanced communication systems and threat detection equipment. The armor's power systems support additional equipment, including advanced medical systems, environmental controls, and emergency beacons that function independently of external power sources. Naval commissars operate under different equipment requirements that reflect the unique challenges of void warfare and shipboard operations. Their gear emphasizes compact design and magnetic attachment systems that prevent loss during combat maneuvers or emergency decompression events. Weapons are modified for use in pressurized environments with specialized ammunition that reduces the risk of hull breaches while maintaining lethal effectiveness against human targets. The ceremonial aspects of commissarial equipment serve purposes that extend far beyond mere decoration, creating psychological effects that enhance the officer's authority and effectiveness. The gleam of polished leather, the intricate detailing of metalwork, and the precise arrangement of insignia combine to create an impression of absolute competence and unwavering dedication. These visual elements communicate imperial authority to populations that may lack sophisticated understanding of military hierarchy or bureaucratic structure. Regional variations in commissarial equipment reflect local manufacturing capabilities and environmental requirements while maintaining the essential elements that define their role. Commissars operating in the Eastern Fringe might carry weapons manufactured on forge worlds that specialize in plasma technology, while those serving in the Segmentum Solar typically receive equipment produced in the great foundries of Mars. These variations create subtle differences in appearance and capability that experienced observers can use to determine a commissar's probable origin and service history. The maintenance and care of commissarial equipment represents both practical necessity and religious obligation, with proper weapon maintenance considered a form of worship that honors the Emperor's gifts. Commissars spend considerable time each day cleaning, inspecting, and blessing their gear, understanding that mechanical failure could prove fatal in critical situations. This routine also serves psychological purposes, providing structure and focus that reinforces the discipline essential to effective leadership under extreme stress. The authority to execute any Imperial Guard soldier without trial or appeal represents the most feared and controversial power wielded by the Commissariat, a legal sanction codified within the Lex Imperialis that places the power of life and death directly in the hands of individual officers. This ultimate authority derives from the fundamental imperial doctrine that the emperor's will supersedes all other considerations, including the preservation of individual life, when the greater cause of humanity's survival hangs in the balance. The legal framework supporting summary execution was established during the dark days following the Horus Heresy, when the fragility of human loyalty had been demonstrated with catastrophic consequences across half the galaxy. The Lex Imperialis grants commissars the right to execute soldiers for three primary offenses: cowardice in the face of the enemy, heretical behavior or speech, and insubordination to lawful authority. These broad categories encompass a vast range of potential infractions, from the obvious case of a soldier fleeing from combat to the more subtle manifestations of doubt that might spread through a unit like a contagion. The law requires no formal trial, no gathering of evidence beyond the commissar's personal observation, and no appeal process that might delay the restoration of discipline when seconds could determine the fate of entire campaigns. Cowardice represents the most straightforward grounds for summary execution, typically manifesting as retreat without orders, abandonment of assigned positions, or refusal to advance when commanded. The commissar's judgment in these situations must account for tactical circumstances that might justify apparent cowardice, distinguishing between legitimate tactical withdrawal and genuine failure of nerve. Experienced commissars learn to recognize the difference between momentary hesitation caused by shock or confusion and the deeper paralysis that indicates a complete breakdown of military discipline. The execution must serve as an example that restores unit cohesion rather than simply punishing individual failure. Heretical behavior encompasses a broader range of offenses that can be more difficult to identify and prove definitively. Soldiers who question the emperor's divinity, express doubt about imperial doctrine, or demonstrate sympathy for alien cultures face immediate execution if discovered by vigilant commissars. The challenge lies in distinguishing between genuine heretical corruption and the natural questioning that occurs among intelligent individuals facing the horrors of galactic warfare. Commissars must evaluate context, intent, and the potential for contamination spreading to other soldiers when determining whether execution serves the greater good. Insubordination covers direct refusal to obey lawful orders, but also extends to more subtle forms of resistance that undermine military hierarchy and effectiveness. Soldiers who openly criticize their officers, spread rumors that damage morale, or encourage others to question legitimate authority may find themselves facing the commissar's bolt pistol. The key determination involves assessing whether the behavior threatens unit cohesion and military effectiveness to a degree that justifies the ultimate sanction. The psychological impact of summary executions on unit morale creates a complex dynamic that skilled commissars must navigate with considerable expertise and judgment. The immediate effect typically involves a sharp restoration of discipline as soldiers witness the consequences of unacceptable behavior, but this initial compliance may mask deeper resentments that could prove more dangerous than the original offense. Troops who witness what they perceive as unjust executions may lose faith in their leadership while maintaining outward compliance, creating a brittle facade of discipline that could shatter at the worst possible moment. The fear generated by summary executions serves multiple functions within Imperial Guard formations, creating an environment where soldiers understand that failure to perform their duties carries the ultimate penalty. This fear often proves more effective than positive motivation in maintaining discipline during desperate situations where retreat seems preferable to continued fighting. Soldiers who might otherwise break and run when faced with overwhelming odds frequently continue fighting, simply because they understand that the commissar behind them represents a more immediate threat than the enemy to their front. However, excessive reliance on fear-based discipline creates its own problems that experienced commissars learn to recognize and address. Units that function purely through terror often lack the initiative and creativity necessary for complex operations, with soldiers afraid to make decisions or take action without explicit orders. The constant stress of operating under threat of execution can lead to psychological breakdown among even veteran troops, manifesting as either complete paralysis or reckless abandon that serves no tactical purpose. The most effective commissars learn to balance fear with inspiration, using executions sparingly while building genuine loyalty through shared hardship and demonstrated competence. These officers understand that soldiers who fight from conviction rather than terror prove more reliable in extended campaigns where constant supervision becomes impossible. The execution becomes a tool of last resort rather than the primary method of maintaining discipline, reserved for situations where other approaches have failed or where immediate action is required to prevent larger disasters. Unit cohesion represents another critical factor that influences the psychological impact of summary executions. Close-knit formations with strong internal bonds may react negatively to the execution of popular soldiers, viewing the commissar as an outsider who fails to understand the realities of their situation. Conversely, units with poor internal discipline may welcome the removal of troublemakers who undermine collective effectiveness. The commissar must assess these dynamics carefully, understanding that the same action might strengthen one unit while destroying another. The timing of executions proves crucial in determining their psychological impact on surrounding troops. Executions conducted immediately before major operations serve as stark reminders of the consequences of failure, often stiffening resolve during critical moments. However, executions carried out after defeats or during periods of low morale may be perceived as scapegoating, potentially triggering broader disciplinary problems as soldiers lose confidence in their leadership's competence and fairness. Notable examples of field executions throughout imperial history illustrate both the potential benefits and devastating consequences of exercising this ultimate authority. During the Sabbat World's Crusade, Commissar Ibram Gaunt faced the difficult decision of executing Trooper Bragg for apparent cowardice during the defense of Tanith. The soldier had abandoned his position during a critical phase of the battle, potentially compromising the entire defensive line. Gaunt's decision to spare Bragg and instead investigate the circumstances revealed that the trooper had been attempting to rescue wounded comrades, an action that appeared cowardly from a distance, but demonstrated genuine heroism upon closer examination. This incident highlights the importance of thorough assessment before exercising summary execution authority. Gaunt's restraint preserved not only Bragg's life, but also maintained the trust and loyalty of the Tanith First and Only, who recognized their commissar's commitment to justice rather than mere expedience. The unit's subsequent performance validated this approach, with soldiers demonstrating exceptional courage and initiative because they trusted their commissar to make fair decisions even under extreme pressure. Conversely, the actions of Commissar Voss during the Armageddon Steel Legion's operations against Orc forces demonstrate the catastrophic consequences of poor judgment in exercising execution authority. Voss ordered the summary execution of Colonel Jerton for tactical withdrawal in the face of overwhelming Orc assault, viewing the retreat as cowardice despite the tactical necessity of preserving forces for a planned counterattack. The execution of a popular and competent officer destroyed morale within the regiment, leading to a complete breakdown of discipline that required the intervention of multiple other commissars to restore order. The Voss incident illustrates how summary executions can backfire when they conflict with soldiers' understanding of tactical reality and competent leadership. The troops recognized that Jerton's withdrawal had been tactically sound, and that Voss's execution represented poor judgment rather than necessary discipline. The resulting loss of confidence in commissarial authority required months to repair and significantly compromised the regiment's effectiveness during subsequent operations. The Cadian shock troops' experience during the 13th Black Crusade provides additional examples of both effective and counterproductive uses of summary execution authority. Commissar Draver's execution of several soldiers for spreading defeatist rumors during the Siege of Cadia helped maintain morale during the darkest phases of the campaign. The soldiers had been openly discussing the impossibility of victory and encouraging others to consider surrender, behavior that could have triggered a complete collapse of resistance. Draver's swift action eliminated the source of contamination while demonstrating that defeat was not inevitable as long as Imperial forces maintained their fighting spirit. However, Draver's later execution of Lieutenant Cage for questioning orders to hold an obviously untenable position created significant problems within the command structure. Cage had been attempting to develop alternative tactical approaches that might preserve his men's lives while accomplishing the mission's objectives, behavior that demonstrated initiative and concern for his troops rather than cowardice or insubordination. The execution eliminated a competent officer while sending the message that tactical creativity was unwelcome, leading to increasingly rigid and ineffective responses to chaos attacks. The protocols and considerations that guide commissarial decision-making in potential execution situations reflect centuries of accumulated experience in balancing immediate disciplinary needs with long-term unit effectiveness. The first consideration involves assessing the immediate tactical situation and determining whether the offense directly threatens mission success or unit survival. Cowardice during active combat operations typically warrants immediate execution, while similar behavior during rest periods might be addressed through other disciplinary measures. The severity and public nature of the offense influences the appropriate response, with private expressions of doubt requiring different handling than public displays of cowardice or insubordination. Commissars must consider whether the behavior has been witnessed by other soldiers and what message their response will send to the broader unit. Private counseling might address individual problems without undermining overall morale, while public offenses typically require public responses to maintain the integrity of military discipline. The offender's service record and previous behavior patterns provide important context for determining appropriate punishment. Veteran soldiers with exemplary records who commit isolated acts of apparent cowardice may be experiencing temporary psychological breakdown that could be addressed through other means. Conversely, soldiers with histories of disciplinary problems who commit relatively minor offenses might require execution to prevent their influence from spreading to other troops. Unit cohesion and morale represent critical factors that influence the decision to execute or pursue alternative disciplinary measures. Strong units with high morale can often absorb the shock of executions without significant degradation in performance, while fragile formations might be pushed beyond their breaking point by the loss of additional personnel. Commissars must evaluate whether execution will strengthen or weaken the unit's overall effectiveness, understanding that tactical considerations sometimes override strict adherence to disciplinary standards. The availability of replacement personnel affects the calculus surrounding summary executions, with units already operating below strength requiring more careful consideration before removing additional soldiers from the ranks. The loss of specialized personnel such as heavy weapons operators, vehicle crews, or communications specialists might compromise tactical capabilities to a degree that outweighs the disciplinary benefits of execution. Commissars must balance the immediate need for discipline against the long-term requirement for operational effectiveness. Environmental and logistical factors also influence execution decisions, with isolated units operating without resupply or reinforcement facing different considerations than formations with ready access to replacements and support. The psychological impact of executions may prove more severe in small, isolated units where every individual contributes significantly to collective survival. Conversely, large formations might require more dramatic disciplinary measures to ensure that examples reach all personnel effectively. The presence of other imperial agents or observers can complicate execution decisions, with commissars needing to consider how their actions will be perceived and reported to higher authorities. Inquisitors, senior officers, or representatives of other imperial organizations might view summary executions as either necessary discipline or excessive brutality, depending on their own perspectives and agendas. Commissars must navigate these political considerations while maintaining their primary focus on unit effectiveness and mission success. The long-term consequences of execution decisions extend far beyond the immediate tactical situation, influencing unit culture and effectiveness for months or years following the incident. Soldiers remember how their commissars handled disciplinary situations, and these memories shape their attitudes toward authority and their willingness to take risks or demonstrate initiative. Commissars who develop reputations for fairness and competent judgment typically command greater respect and loyalty than those who rely primarily on fear and intimidation. The traditional perception of commissars as purely disciplinary officers wielding summary execution as their primary tool represents a fundamental misunderstanding of their actual role within Imperial Guard formations. While the authority to execute wavering soldiers remains their most visible power, the most effective commissars function as genuine combat leaders who inspire through personal courage and tactical acumen rather than relying solely on fear-based compliance. These officers lead from the front during the most dangerous assaults, their distinctive silhouettes becoming rallying points for advancing troops who draw strength from witnessing their commissars' unflinching advance into enemy fire. The combat leadership role emerges naturally from the commissar's position within the regimental command structure, where their independence from normal military hierarchy allows them to make decisions unconstrained by concerns about career advancement or political consequences. Unlike regimental officers whose promotions depend on maintaining favorable relationships with superiors, commissars answer directly to the Adeptus Militarum and can therefore focus entirely on tactical effectiveness and mission success. This freedom from conventional military politics enables them to take risks that other officers might avoid, often resulting in breakthrough actions that change the course of entire battles. During assault operations, experienced commissars position themselves at critical points where their presence will have maximum psychological impact on both their own troops and enemy forces. The sight of a commissar's peaked cap and greatcoat advancing steadily through incoming fire provides powerful motivation for soldiers who might otherwise hesitate at crucial moments. The commissar's bolt pistol and chainsword serve not merely as instruments of execution, but as symbols of imperial authority that continue functioning even when conventional command structures break down under combat stress. The tactical positioning of commissars during combat operations requires careful consideration of multiple factors, including unit morale, enemy disposition, and the specific objectives of each phase of the battle. Commissars assigned to assault formations typically advance with the first wave, their presence serving to prevent the natural tendency of troops to seek cover or delay their advance when faced with determined resistance. The psychological effect of witnessing their commissar moving forward under fire often proves sufficient to overcome the survival instincts that might otherwise cause units to falter at critical moments. Conversely, commissars attached to defensive formations position themselves at points where retreat becomes most likely, serving as human barriers against unauthorized withdrawal while providing steady leadership during extended engagements. Their role shifts from inspiring advance to preventing collapse, with the commissar's presence reminding soldiers that falling back without orders carries consequences more immediate than enemy fire. The most skilled practitioners learn to read the ebb and flow of defensive battles, reinforcing weak points with their personal presence while coordinating with other leaders to maintain overall unit integrity. The coordination of combined arms operations represents one of the most complex challenges facing commissars who must integrate infantry, armor, artillery, and specialized formations into cohesive tactical plans. Unlike regimental commanders, who typically focus on their specific unit type, commissars often find themselves serving as liaison officers between different branches of imperial forces, their authority cutting across traditional organizational boundaries. This role requires comprehensive understanding of the capabilities and limitations of various Imperial Guard formations, from the shock tactics of assault troops to the precision fire support provided by artillery batteries. Armored operations present particular challenges for commissars who must maintain their leadership role while coordinating with tank crews operating inside sealed vehicles. The traditional methods of personal example and direct supervision become impossible when troops are scattered across multiple armored vehicles, advancing at high speed across hostile terrain. Successful commissars adapt their techniques to these circumstances, using Vox communications to maintain contact with individual tank commanders while positioning themselves in command vehicles where they can observe the broader tactical situation. The psychological dynamics of armored warfare require different approaches from traditional infantry leadership, as tank crews develop strong bonds with their vehicles and fellow crew members that can override broader unit loyalty. Commissars must understand these relationships and work within them rather than attempting to impose external authority through intimidation. The confined spaces and technical complexity of armored operations create stress patterns that differ significantly from infantry combat, requiring commissars to recognize and address problems before they compromise operational effectiveness. Artillery coordination demands yet another set of skills as commissars work with battery commanders to provide fire support for advancing infantry formations. The timing and accuracy of artillery strikes often determine the success or failure of assault operations, making the relationship between commissars and artillery officers crucial to tactical success. Experienced commissars learn to read battlefield conditions and coordinate fire missions that suppress enemy positions without endangering friendly forces, a skill that requires both technical knowledge and intuitive understanding of combat dynamics. The integration of specialized Imperial Guard formations such as stormtroopers, rough riders, or rattling snipers adds additional complexity to combined arms operations. These elite units operate according to different tactical doctrines and maintain distinct cultures that can clash with standard Imperial Guard procedures. Commissars must adapt their leadership style to accommodate these differences while ensuring that specialized formations contribute effectively to broader tactical objectives rather than pursuing independent agendas that might compromise overall mission success. The balance between maintaining discipline and providing genuine military leadership represents one of the most delicate aspects of effective commissarial service. Soldiers who respect their commissars' tactical competence and personal courage respond more positively to discipline when it becomes necessary, understanding that punishment serves legitimate military purposes rather than satisfying personal preferences or political requirements. This respect must be earned through demonstrated competence under fire and consistent concern for the welfare of troops under the commissar's authority. Building genuine respect requires commissars to share the hardships and dangers faced by common soldiers rather than maintaining the distance typical of senior officers. Commissars who eat the same rations, sleep in the same conditions, and expose themselves to the same risks as their troops develop credibility that cannot be achieved through rank or authority alone. This shared experience creates bonds of mutual respect that prove far more durable than relationships based purely on fear of punishment. The demonstration of tactical competence becomes particularly important during complex operations where soldiers can observe their commissar's decision-making process and evaluate the quality of their leadership. Troops quickly recognize when their commissar understands battlefield conditions and makes sound tactical decisions, just as they identify officers whose incompetence threatens their survival. The commissar's military education and combat experience must be sufficient to earn respect from veteran soldiers who have survived multiple campaigns and developed sophisticated understanding of effective tactics. Personal courage represents another essential component of effective commissarial leadership, as soldiers will not follow officers they perceive as cowards regardless of their formal authority. The commissar's willingness to expose themselves to enemy fire, to advance when others hesitate, and to remain calm under extreme stress provides powerful examples that influence the behavior of entire units. This courage must be genuine rather than merely theatrical, as experienced soldiers can distinguish between authentic bravery and reckless posturing that serves no tactical purpose. The development of trust between commissars and their assigned units requires consistent behavior over extended periods, with soldiers evaluating their commissar's actions across multiple engagements and varied circumstances. Single acts of courage or competence may create positive impressions, but lasting respect develops only through repeated demonstration of reliability and sound judgment. Commissars who prove themselves during difficult situations often find that their authority becomes accepted rather than merely tolerated, creating more effective working relationships. Several commissars throughout imperial history have transcended their disciplinary role to become legendary battlefield commanders, whose tactical genius and inspirational leadership transformed them into figures of genuine admiration rather than mere fear. Commissar Ibrahim Gaunt of the Tanith first and only exemplifies this transformation, having evolved from a traditional political officer into a respected colonel commissar whose troops follow him out of loyalty rather than compulsion. Gaunt's tactical innovations during the Sabbat Worlds Crusade demonstrated how commissars can adapt standard Imperial Guard doctrine to local conditions while maintaining the aggressive spirit that characterizes effective Imperial operations. Gaunt's leadership during the defense of Vervenhive showcased the potential for commissars to function as genuine military commanders rather than merely disciplinary enforcers. His coordination of combined arms operations involving multiple regiments, local militia forces, and civilian volunteers required skills that extended far beyond traditional commissarial training. The successful defense of the Hive City validated his approach and established him as one of the most effective battlefield commanders in the Sabbat Worlds theater. The Tanith First and Only's performance under Gaunt's command illustrates how respect-based leadership can produce results superior to those achieved through fear alone. The regiment's willingness to undertake extremely dangerous missions, their initiative in developing innovative tactical solutions, and their exceptional unit cohesion all reflect the positive command climate created by Gaunt's leadership style. These troops fight not because they fear execution, but because they trust their commander's competence and believe in the missions they are assigned. Commissar Caiaphas Cain represents another example of a political officer who achieved legendary status through battlefield competence rather than disciplinary severity. Cain's tactical acumen during operations against Orc forces on Gravelax demonstrated how commissars can identify and exploit enemy weaknesses that might be overlooked by conventional military thinking. His ability to coordinate with local imperial forces while maintaining the independence necessary for effective commissarial function created a model that other officers studied and attempted to emulate. Kane's reputation for personal courage, while perhaps somewhat exaggerated by propaganda efforts, reflects genuine tactical competence and willingness to accept personal risk when circumstances require aggressive action. His troops developed confidence in his leadership abilities that translated into improved performance during complex operations, requiring initiative and adaptability. The 597th Valhallan's subsequent service record validates this approach, with the regiment achieving success rates significantly above average for similar formations. The psychological impact of serving under respected commissars extends beyond immediate tactical benefits to influence the long-term development of Imperial Guard formations. Units that experience competent commissarial leadership often maintain higher standards of performance even when assigned new political officers, having internalized expectations of professionalism and tactical excellence. These formations develop institutional cultures that emphasize competence and courage rather than mere compliance with regulations. Commissar Yarrick's legendary status within the Armageddon Steel Legion demonstrates how battlefield leadership can create lasting bonds between commissars and their assigned formations. Yarrick's personal combat against Orc warboss Gazkul Mag Uruk Thraka became the stuff of legend throughout the Imperial Guard, inspiring countless soldiers across multiple sectors who drew strength from accounts of his courage and determination. His tactical innovations during the Second War for Armageddon established new doctrines for urban warfare that were subsequently adopted by formations throughout the Imperium. The Steel Legion's devotion to Yarrick transcended normal military loyalty, with soldiers viewing their commissar as an almost mythical figure whose presence guaranteed victory against impossible odds. This psychological effect proved particularly valuable during the prolonged siege warfare that characterized the Armageddon conflicts, where maintaining morale over extended periods determined the ultimate outcome. Yarrick's ability to inspire continued resistance, despite enormous casualties and material shortages, demonstrated the power of respected leadership in sustaining military effectiveness. The tactical expertise demonstrated by legendary commissars often involves innovative applications of standard Imperial Guard doctrine adapted to specific battlefield conditions. These officers learned to recognize opportunities that might be missed by commanders focused on conventional approaches, using their independence from normal command structures to implement creative solutions. Their success in these endeavors establishes precedents that influence tactical development throughout the Imperial Guard. The mentorship provided by experienced commissars to junior officers represents another crucial aspect of their battlefield leadership role. Young commissars assigned to veteran formations benefit enormously from observing how respected leaders balance disciplinary requirements with genuine military command. This informal training supplements the theoretical education provided by Schola Progenium facilities with practical experience that cannot be replicated in academic settings. Senior commissars often take personal responsibility for developing the tactical skills of their subordinates, understanding that the commissariat's long-term effectiveness depends on producing competent leaders rather than mere enforcers. This mentorship extends beyond military tactics to include the political and psychological skills necessary for effective service in the complex environment of imperial warfare. The relationships formed during this process often endure throughout entire careers, creating networks of mutual support that enhance overall commissarial effectiveness. The evolution of individual commissars from disciplinary officers to battlefield commanders reflects the natural progression of competent individuals who survive long enough to gain extensive combat experience. Those who demonstrate tactical aptitude and leadership ability often find themselves assigned increasingly complex missions that require genuine military command skills. The most successful adapt to these expanded responsibilities while maintaining the core competencies that define effective commissarial service. The transformation from battlefield commander to spiritual guardian represents perhaps the most complex evolution in a commissar's expanding responsibilities, requiring mastery of theological doctrine alongside tactical expertise. The daily maintenance of imperial creed observance within military formations demands constant vigilance against the subtle erosion of faith that can occur when soldiers focus primarily on survival rather than spiritual duty. Commissars must recognize that religious devotion serves as the foundation for all other forms of military discipline, understanding that troops who lose faith in the Emperor's divine protection become susceptible to the more obvious temptations of cowardice and desertion. The morning prayer sessions that begin each day in properly administered Imperial Guard formations require careful orchestration to achieve maximum spiritual impact while accommodating the practical demands of military operations. Commissars typically position themselves prominently during these gatherings, their presence serving as both inspiration and subtle reminder that participation is mandatory rather than optional. The selection of appropriate prayers and litanies must reflect current operational circumstances, with different invocations chosen for units preparing for assault operations versus those conducting defensive or garrison duties. The recitation of the Imperial Creed during these sessions serves multiple purposes beyond simple religious observance, functioning as a form of psychological conditioning that reinforces loyalty while identifying individuals whose participation lacks genuine conviction. Commissars learn to observe subtle signs of discomfort or reluctance during prayer, noting soldiers who mumble the words without proper enthusiasm or whose body language suggests skepticism about the doctrines being proclaimed. These observations form the basis for subsequent private conversations or more intensive monitoring of potentially problematic individuals. The adaptation of prayer sessions to local conditions requires considerable theological knowledge combined with sensitivity to the diverse backgrounds of Imperial Guard personnel drawn from across the galaxy. Regiments recruited from feral worlds may require simplified versions of complex theological concepts, while formations from civilized worlds might respond better to sophisticated doctrinal discussions that engage their intellectual capabilities. The Commissar must gauge the educational level and cultural background of their assigned troops, modifying their approach accordingly without compromising the essential messages of Imperial doctrine. The identification of heretical thinking among the ranks presents one of the most challenging aspects of ideological maintenance, requiring commissars to distinguish between natural human doubt and genuine corruption that threatens unit integrity. Soldiers facing the horrors of galactic warfare inevitably question aspects of Imperial doctrine, particularly when witnessing events that seem to contradict teachings about the Emperor's protection of the faithful. The Commissar must evaluate whether such questioning represents healthy intellectual engagement or dangerous skepticism that could metastasize into outright heresy. Private conversations with individual soldiers provide opportunities for commissars to assess the depth and nature of any doctrinal concerns while offering guidance that addresses specific doubts without undermining broader faith. These discussions require considerable psychological skill, as heavy-handed approaches may drive genuine concerns underground where they can fester and spread. The most effective commissars learn to present themselves as spiritual counselors rather than inquisitors during these encounters, creating environments where soldiers feel safe expressing their struggles with faith. The monitoring of informal conversations among troops requires subtle observation techniques that gather intelligence without creating an atmosphere of paranoia that could damage unit cohesion. Commissars must position themselves where they can overhear casual discussions while appearing to focus on other duties, learning to identify the natural leaders whose opinions influence their peers. Soldiers who consistently express pessimism about Imperial doctrine or who question the legitimacy of their officers require immediate attention before their attitudes spread to others. The challenge of addressing heretical thinking becomes particularly acute when dealing with veteran formations whose members have witnessed events that challenge simple faith in Imperial protection. Troops who have survived multiple campaigns often develop cynical attitudes toward official doctrine, viewing religious observances as empty rituals that provide no practical benefit during combat operations. These soldiers may not actively oppose imperial doctrine, but their lack of genuine faith can prove contagious among newer recruits who look to veterans for guidance about military life. The vetting of communications represents another crucial responsibility that requires commissars to intercept and analyze both official and unofficial correspondence flowing through their assigned formations. Letters from home, personal journals, and casual conversations all provide potential sources of seditious content that could undermine military effectiveness if left unchecked. The commissar must establish systems for monitoring these communications without completely destroying the morale benefits that contact with home provides for deployed soldiers. The examination of personal correspondence requires careful attention to subtle expressions of discontent that might indicate broader problems within the soldier's home environment or suggest exposure to heretical influences. Family members who express doubts about imperial policy, local officials who demonstrate insufficient loyalty to imperial institutions, or friends who have been influenced by seditious propaganda all represent potential sources of contamination that must be addressed. The commissar's response might range from counseling the affected soldier to initiating investigations of their home communities. Personal journals and diaries provide particularly valuable insights into the psychological state of individual soldiers, revealing private thoughts and concerns that might not surface during official interactions. Commissars who regularly review these documents can identify developing problems before they manifest as disciplinary issues, intervening with appropriate counseling or corrective measures. However, this monitoring must be conducted discreetly to avoid creating resentment among troops who discover that their private thoughts are subject to official scrutiny. The detection of seditious content requires familiarity with the various forms that heretical thinking can assume, from obvious expressions of disloyalty to subtle undermining of imperial authority through seemingly innocent comments. Soldiers who consistently focus on negative aspects of imperial policy, who express sympathy for alien cultures, or who question the necessity of current military operations may be developing attitudes that could prove dangerous under stress. The commissar must evaluate whether such content represents temporary frustration or genuine ideological corruption. The proper reverence for the emperor and imperial institutions must be maintained through constant reinforcement of appropriate attitudes and responses to official symbols and ceremonies. Soldiers who fail to demonstrate proper respect during the playing of imperial hymns, who treat religious artifacts casually, or who show insufficient enthusiasm during loyalty oaths require immediate correction. These seemingly minor infractions often indicate deeper problems with faith and loyalty that could manifest more seriously under combat conditions. The enforcement of proper reverence extends beyond formal ceremonies to encompass daily interactions with imperial symbols and institutions. Soldiers must demonstrate appropriate respect when handling equipment bearing the aquila, when discussing imperial officials, and when referring to the emperor in casual conversation. The commissar's role involves modeling correct behavior while correcting improper attitudes before they become habitual patterns that influence other troops. The collaboration with ecclesiarchy representatives requires careful navigation of potentially conflicting authorities and jurisdictional boundaries that can create tension within Imperial Guard formations. Chaplains and other religious officials bring specialized theological knowledge and formal religious authority that complements the commissar's political oversight, but their presence can also create confusion about ultimate responsibility for spiritual matters. The most effective working relationships develop when both parties recognize their complementary roles rather than competing for influence over the troops. The jurisdictional boundaries between military and religious authority become particularly complex when dealing with suspected heresy or other serious breaches of imperial doctrine. Ecclesiarchy representatives may claim primary authority over religious matters, while commissars maintain responsibility for military discipline, creating potential conflicts when the same incident falls under both jurisdictions. Clear communication and mutual respect between these officials prevents such disputes from undermining their shared mission of maintaining loyalty and faith within imperial formations. The coordination of religious ceremonies and observances requires careful planning to ensure that military necessities do not interfere with proper spiritual practices, while avoiding situations where religious requirements compromise operational effectiveness. Major religious holidays and observances must be accommodated within military schedules, with appropriate modifications made for units engaged in active combat operations. The Commissar's role involves balancing these competing demands while ensuring that neither spiritual nor military requirements are completely sacrificed. The theological education of Commissars must be sufficient to engage in meaningful discussions with trained ecclesiarchy personnel while maintaining their independence from purely religious authority structures. This knowledge encompasses not only basic imperial doctrine, but also the subtle theological distinctions that separate orthodox belief from various forms of heresy. Commissars must understand the historical development of imperial religious thought and the specific challenges that different theological positions present to military discipline and effectiveness. The challenge of maintaining ideological purity while adapting to local conditions represents one of the most complex aspects of commissarial service, requiring flexibility in methods while maintaining absolute consistency in fundamental principles. Imperial Guard formations operate across thousands of worlds with vastly different cultures, environmental conditions, and local traditions that must be accommodated without compromising core imperial values. The Commissar must distinguish between acceptable local variations and dangerous deviations that threaten imperial unity. Local religious practices present particular challenges when they conflict with standard imperial doctrine or when they incorporate elements that might be considered heretical by orthodox standards. Worlds with strong indigenous spiritual traditions may have integrated these practices with imperial worship in ways that serve local needs while potentially creating theological problems. The Commissar must evaluate whether such syncretism strengthens or weakens overall loyalty to the Emperor, while considering the practical consequences of attempting to eliminate deeply rooted cultural practices. The adaptation of imperial doctrine to local environmental conditions requires careful consideration of how extreme planetary conditions might affect the practical application of religious observances and military protocols. Desert worlds may require modifications to standard prayer schedules to accommodate extreme heat, while ice worlds might necessitate indoor religious ceremonies that differ from traditional outdoor observances. The Commissar must ensure that such adaptations serve legitimate practical needs rather than providing excuses for avoiding proper religious duties. The practical necessities of military campaigns often create situations where strict adherence to imperial doctrine must be balanced against immediate operational requirements that could determine mission success or failure. Extended combat operations may prevent normal religious observances, while emergency situations might require cooperation with forces or individuals whose loyalty to imperial doctrine remains questionable. The Commissar must make difficult decisions about when such compromises serve the greater good and when they represent unacceptable deviations from imperial principles. The maintenance of communication with higher commissarial authority during extended campaigns provides essential support for making these complex decisions, while ensuring that local adaptations do not drift too far from acceptable imperial standards. Regular reports to senior commissars and Adeptus Militarum officials allow for consultation on difficult theological or disciplinary questions, while providing oversight that prevents gradual erosion of proper standards. These communications also serve as historical records that document the evolution of imperial doctrine under diverse operational conditions. The long-term consequences of ideological compromise must be carefully weighed against immediate tactical advantages. with Commissars understanding that short-term gains achieved through doctrinal flexibility may create lasting problems for imperial authority and unit discipline. Troops who observe their Commissar making exceptions to imperial doctrine may conclude that other rules and regulations are similarly flexible, leading to gradual erosion of military discipline that proves difficult to restore. The challenge involves maintaining necessary flexibility while preserving the fundamental authority structures that enable effective military operations. The destruction of Tanith during the early phases of the Sabbat Worlds Crusade created circumstances that would forge one of the most unconventional and effective Commissar-led regiments in Imperial Guard history. Ibram Gaunt, then serving as a junior Commissar attached to the Heakin 8th Assault Regiment, witnessed the orbital bombardment that reduced the forest world to ash and flame as chaos forces overran the planet's defenses. The evacuation of Tanith's remaining population became a desperate race against time, with Imperial transports loading civilians and military personnel, while enemy forces closed in on the primary spaceport. The formation of the Tanith first and only emerged from this chaos, as surviving members of the planet's military forces were consolidated into a single regiment under emergency protocols established by War Master Makaroth's staff. Unlike traditional Imperial Guard formations recruited from stable planetary populations, this new regiment consisted entirely of refugees whose homeworld had been obliterated before their eyes. The psychological impact of this loss created unique challenges for military organization, as these soldiers possessed no home to defend and no familiar environment to which they might eventually return. Gaunt's assignment as the regiment's Commissar occurred through a combination of circumstance and recognition of his demonstrated competence during the Tanith evacuation. His actions during the final hours of the planet's defense had impressed senior officers who observed his ability to maintain discipline among panicking civilians while coordinating with military units attempting to establish defensive perimeters. The young Commissar's willingness to remain on the surface until the last possible moment, ensuring that every available transport was filled to capacity, demonstrated the combination of courage and tactical judgment that marked him as exceptional among his peers. The early weeks of the regiment's existence tested every aspect of Gaunt's leadership abilities as he worked to transform traumatized survivors into an effective fighting force. The Tanith soldiers brought unique skills from their forest world background, including exceptional marksmanship abilities developed through hunting in dense woodland environments and natural stealth capabilities that proved invaluable during reconnaissance operations. However, these individual talents required integration into standard Imperial Guard tactical doctrine while maintaining the unit cohesion necessary for complex military operations. Gaunt's approach to building the Tanith first and only differed significantly from traditional commissarial methods, emphasizing the development of trust and mutual respect rather than relying primarily on fear-based discipline. He recognized that soldiers who had lost everything except their loyalty to each other required different handling than typical Imperial Guard recruits who maintained connections to home worlds and civilian lives. The shared trauma of Tanith's destruction created powerful bonds among the survivors, but these relationships could either strengthen or undermine military effectiveness depending on how they were channeled. The establishment of the regiment's distinctive culture began with Gaunt's decision to preserve Tanith traditions and customs that did not conflict with Imperial military doctrine. The soldiers were permitted to maintain their traditional pale blue fatigues rather than adopting standard Imperial Guard coloration, and their natural woodcraft skills were incorporated into specialized training programs that enhanced their effectiveness as light infantry. These accommodations demonstrated respect for the soldiers' heritage while channeling their unique capabilities toward military objectives. The development of trust between Gaunt and his troops required consistent demonstration of competence and genuine concern for their welfare during the regiment's initial combat deployments. Unlike many commissars who maintained deliberate distance from their assigned soldiers, Gaunt participated directly in training exercises and shared the hardships of field conditions. His willingness to learn from experienced Tanith woodsmen about forest warfare techniques showed respect for their expertise, while building personal relationships that transcended formal military hierarchy. The regiment's first major engagement on Blackshard demonstrated both the potential and the challenges of Gaunt's leadership approach. The Tanith soldiers' natural stealth abilities proved devastatingly effective against chaos cultists operating in the planet's industrial wastelands, but their unfamiliarity with standard Imperial Guard tactics created coordination problems with supporting units. Gaunt's role involved bridging these gaps while allowing his troops to utilize their unique advantages without compromising broader tactical objectives. The liberation of Vervenhive represented the first major test of the Tanith First and Only's capabilities under Gaunt's leadership, involving complex urban warfare operations that required adaptation of their forest fighting skills to an entirely different environment. The Hive City's towering spires and labyrinthine passages presented challenges that bore little resemblance to the woodland environments where the Tanith soldiers had developed their expertise. Gaunt's tactical planning had to account for these differences, while identifying ways that his troops' specialized abilities could contribute to the overall campaign. The coordination with local defense forces during the Vervenhive operation required diplomatic skills that extended beyond traditional commissarial training, as Gaunt worked to integrate his regiment with militia units whose loyalty and competence remained questionable. The political situation within the Hive created additional complications, with various factions pursuing conflicting agendas that threatened to undermine military operations. Gaunt's independence from local command structures proved crucial in navigating these challenges while maintaining focus on legitimate military objectives. The urban warfare techniques developed during the Vervenhive campaign became models for subsequent Imperial Guard operations in similar environments, with Gaunt's innovations in small unit tactics and coordination between regular and irregular forces studied by military academies across the sector. The Tanith soldiers' ability to move silently through the Hive's maintenance passages and ventilation systems provided intelligence-gathering capabilities that conventional forces could not match. These advantages required careful integration with standard Imperial Guard assault techniques to achieve maximum tactical impact. The defense of key installations within Vervenhive tested the regiment's ability to conduct sustained operations under extreme pressure while maintaining unit cohesion despite heavy casualties. Gaunt's leadership during these engagements involved constant movement between different defensive positions, his presence serving to reinforce weak points while coordinating with other Imperial forces. The distinctive sound of his bolt pistol and the sight of his peaked cap moving through the combat zones became rallying symbols for both his own troops and allied units. The successful completion of the Vervenhive campaign established Gaunt's reputation as an exceptionally capable battlefield commander, whose methods produced results superior to those achieved through conventional commissarial approaches. The Tanith First and Only's performance during the operation earned recognition from senior Imperial commanders who noted their exceptional effectiveness in specialized roles. This success led to assignment of increasingly complex missions that required the unique combination of skills that Gaunt had developed within his regiment. The Jerian infiltration mission represented perhaps the most challenging assignment in the regiment's history, requiring deep penetration into chaos-held territory for an extended covert operation that tested every aspect of their training and loyalty. The mission parameters demanded absolute secrecy and self-sufficiency over a period of months, with no possibility of reinforcement or extraction if the operation was compromised. Gaunt's decision to personally lead this mission demonstrated his commitment to sharing the risks faced by his troops while ensuring that command decisions reflected direct understanding of field conditions. The preparation for the Jerian mission required extensive modification of standard Imperial Guard equipment and procedures to accommodate the unique requirements of long-term covert operations behind enemy lines. The Tanith soldiers' natural stealth capabilities provided significant advantages for this type of mission. but their distinctive appearance and equipment required careful disguise to avoid detection by chaos forces familiar with imperial military organization. Gaunt coordinated with specialized imperial agencies to obtain false documentation and modified equipment that would support their cover identities. The psychological preparation for extended isolation from imperial forces proved as challenging as the technical aspects of the mission, requiring soldiers to maintain their loyalty and discipline while operating without the normal support structures of imperial military organization. Gaunt's leadership became even more crucial under these circumstances, as his presence provided the only connection to legitimate imperial authority during periods when the mission's success seemed doubtful. The bonds of trust and mutual respect developed during earlier campaigns proved essential for maintaining unit cohesion under these extreme conditions. The execution of the Jerian mission required constant adaptation to changing circumstances and unexpected complications that threatened to compromise the operation's security and effectiveness. Gaunt's tactical flexibility and willingness to modify plans based on developing intelligence allowed the regiment to accomplish their objectives despite encountering situations that had not been anticipated during the planning phase. The success of this operation further enhanced his reputation within Imperial command circles, while demonstrating the effectiveness of his leadership methods under the most demanding conditions. The defense of Ancrian Sextus provided another opportunity for Gaunt to demonstrate his tactical innovations while leading the Tanith first and only in large-scale conventional warfare operations. Unlike the specialized missions that had characterized much of their previous service, this campaign required integration with multiple Imperial Guard regiments in coordinated defensive operations against a major chaos offensive. Gaunt's role expanded beyond simple regimental command to include coordination with other Imperial forces and strategic planning at the sector level. The tactical challenges of defending Ancrian Sextus required creative adaptation of the Tanith regiment's specialized capabilities to conventional defensive warfare while maintaining their effectiveness as a light infantry formation. The planet's varied terrain provided opportunities for the type of mobile operations where the Tanith soldiers excelled, but the overall strategic situation demanded sustained defensive positions that differed from their preferred operational methods. Gaunt's planning had to balance these competing requirements while ensuring that his regiment's contributions supported broader defensive objectives. The evolution of Gaunt's role from traditional Commissar to Colonel Commissar reflected both his demonstrated competence and the unique circumstances of leading a regiment with no traditional homeworld connections to provide external command authority. This transformation required formal recognition from the Adeptus Militarum and modification of standard organizational procedures to accommodate the hybrid command structure. The precedent established by Gaunt's appointment influenced subsequent Imperial Guard organization in situations where traditional command relationships proved inadequate for operational requirements. The command structure of the Tanith first, and only under Gaunt's leadership, represented a significant departure from standard Imperial Guard organization, with the Colonel Commissar exercising both political and military authority in ways that would be considered irregular in conventional formations. This consolidation of authority eliminated potential conflicts between political and military objectives while ensuring that tactical decisions reflected comprehensive understanding of both disciplinary and operational requirements. The success of this arrangement validated the concept for subsequent application in similar circumstances. The loyalty inspired by Gaunt's leadership methods created a regiment whose effectiveness exceeded that of comparable formations operating under traditional command structures, demonstrating that respect-based discipline could produce superior results to fear-based compliance under appropriate circumstances. The Tanith soldiers' willingness to undertake extremely dangerous missions reflected their confidence in their commander's competence and their belief that their sacrifices served legitimate military objectives. This loyalty proved particularly valuable during extended campaigns, where conventional motivational techniques might prove inadequate for maintaining morale and effectiveness. The industrial world of Armageddon became the crucible that would forge one of the Imperium's most legendary commissars when the first tendrils of Wa-Gazkul reached the Armageddon system in the year 940, one of the 41st millennium. Sebastian Yarrick, then serving as a senior commissar attached to the Armageddon Steel Legion, found himself thrust into a position of critical importance as massive orc forces descended upon the Hive world's industrial complexes and sprawling urban centers. The initial reports from outlying settlements painted a grim picture of unprecedented orc organization and tactical sophistication that suggested this invasion represented something far more dangerous than the typical greenskin raids that periodically threatened Imperial worlds. The scale of Gazkul Mag Uruk-Thraka's forces became apparent as orc drop pods and ramshackle landing craft began depositing millions of greenskins across Armageddon's primary continent. Unlike previous orc incursions that typically focused on immediate destruction and looting, this invasion demonstrated clear strategic objectives aimed at capturing and holding key industrial facilities. The orcs moved with uncharacteristic coordination, their advance supported by massive war machines and artillery pieces that indicated extensive preparation and logistical planning. Yarrick recognized immediately that conventional defensive strategies would prove inadequate against an enemy force of this magnitude and sophistication. The planetary defense forces found themselves overwhelmed within the first weeks of the invasion as orc spearheads punched through hastily established defensive lines and began encircling major population centers. The Steel Legion regiments stationed on Armageddon possessed extensive experience in urban warfare and industrial combat, but their numbers proved insufficient to defend the planet's vast industrial complexes against the Greenskin Tide. Emergency communications with Sector Command revealed that significant Imperial reinforcements would require months to arrive, leaving the planet's defenders to conduct a desperate holding action against impossible odds. Yarrick's emergence as a key leader during the crisis reflected both his tactical acumen and his ability to coordinate diverse Imperial forces under extreme pressure. His position as senior commissar granted him authority to override local commanders whose responses proved inadequate to the developing situation, while his detailed knowledge of Armageddon's industrial infrastructure allowed him to identify defensive positions that could be held with available forces. The Commissar's reputation for personal courage and tactical competence had already been established during previous campaigns, but the Armageddon crisis would test these qualities under conditions that pushed human endurance to its absolute limits. The organization of Armageddon's defense required Yarrick to work closely with planetary defense force commanders, Steel Legion officers, and civilian authorities, whose competing priorities and jurisdictional disputes threatened to undermine coordinated resistance. The planet's industrial magnates initially resisted military requisition of their facilities, viewing the conflict as a temporary disruption that would eventually be resolved by Imperial reinforcements. Yarrick's intervention proved crucial in overcoming this resistance, his authority as a commissar allowing him to commandeer essential resources, while his tactical expertise demonstrated how industrial facilities could be converted into effective defensive positions. The adaptation of Armageddon's hive cities for siege warfare represented one of Yarrick's most significant contributions to the planet's defense, transforming sprawling urban centers into interconnected fortress complexes that could sustain prolonged resistance against orc assault. The modification of industrial machinery to produce weapons and ammunition, the conversion of transportation networks into defensive positions, and the organization of civilian populations to support military operations all required coordination on a scale that exceeded normal military planning. Yarrick's ability to integrate these diverse elements into coherent defensive strategies proved essential for maintaining resistance during the darkest phases of the siege. The Steel Legion's performance under Yarek's guidance during the Second War for Armageddon established new standards for urban warfare doctrine that would influence Imperial Guard tactics across the galaxy. The regiment's expertise in mechanized operations proved particularly valuable in the confined spaces of Hive City combat, where their Chimera transports and Leman Russ battle tanks could provide mobile fire support while maintaining the flexibility necessary for rapid redeployment. Yarek's tactical innovations emphasized the integration of armor and infantry in close coordination, creating combined arms teams that could respond effectively to the fluid nature of urban combat. The development of specialized anti-orc tactics reflected Yarek's growing understanding of greenskin psychology and combat methods as the siege progressed. Unlike human enemies who could be demoralized through tactical defeats or heavy casualties, orc forces actually gained enthusiasm from prolonged combat and significant losses. This realization forced a fundamental reassessment of defensive strategies, shifting focus from inflicting maximum casualties to disrupting orc command structures and supply lines that sustain their offensive capabilities. Yarek's ability to adapt Imperial Guard doctrine to accommodate these insights proved crucial for maintaining effective resistance. The coordination of artillery support within the confined spaces of Hive City warfare required innovative approaches that balanced the need for effective fire support against the risk of collateral damage to essential infrastructure. Yarek worked closely with Steel Legion artillery commanders to develop techniques for precision bombardment that could neutralize orc positions without destroying the industrial facilities that sustain the planet's defense. These methods included the use of modified ammunition designed for urban combat and careful coordination with forward observers who could direct fire with unprecedented accuracy. The logistical challenges of sustaining prolonged siege warfare tested every aspect of Imperial military organization as supply lines were repeatedly cut and restored, while combat operations continued without interruption. Yarek's role expanded beyond tactical command to encompass strategic planning for resource allocation, ammunition distribution, and the maintenance of equipment under field conditions. His understanding of industrial processes allowed him to identify alternative sources of essential supplies while coordinating with civilian authorities to maintain production despite constant enemy pressure. The psychological warfare aspects of the Armageddon siege became increasingly important as the conflict extended far beyond its anticipated duration and casualties mounted among both military and civilian populations. Yarek's presence on the front lines served as a powerful morale booster for troops who drew strength from witnessing their commanders' unflinching courage under fire. His distinctive appearance, marked by the peaked commissarial cap and long greatcoat, became a symbol of imperial resistance that inspired continued fighting even when tactical situations seemed hopeless. The personal confrontation between Yarek and Gazkul Mag Uruk Thraka during the Siege of Hades Hive created one of the most legendary episodes in Imperial Guard history, establishing a rivalry that would define both commanders for decades to come. The circumstances of their initial encounter remain somewhat unclear, with various accounts describing different scenarios ranging from close combat during a failed orc assault to a more formal challenge issued by the warboss during a temporary ceasefire. Regardless of the specific details, this confrontation resulted in severe injuries to Yarek that required extensive augmetic reconstruction while establishing his reputation as the one human who could face Gazkul in personal combat. The bionic augmentations that replaced Yarek's damaged organs and limbs following his encounter with the orc warboss transformed him into a figure of legend whose appearance alone could influence the course of battles. The replacement of his right arm with a power claw designed specifically for anti-orc combat provided him with physical capabilities that matched or exceeded those of the largest greenskins. The augmetic eye that replaced his natural vision incorporated targeting systems and threat detection capabilities that enhanced his effectiveness as both a marksman and tactical commander. These modifications created a visual impact that proved as valuable as their practical benefits, with Yarek's distinctive silhouette becoming instantly recognizable to both allies and enemies. The psychological impact of Yarek's augmentations extended far beyond their practical military applications, creating a powerful symbol of imperial determination that refused to yield even when faced with overwhelming odds. Orc forces began to develop superstitious beliefs about the Iron Man, who continued fighting despite injuries that would have killed ordinary humans, while Imperial troops drew inspiration from their commander's refusal to accept defeat. These psychological effects proved particularly valuable during the prolonged urban warfare that characterized the later phases of the Second War for Armageddon. The eventual relief of Armageddon by Space Marine reinforcements and additional Imperial Guard regiments validated Yarek's defensive strategies while establishing his reputation as one of the Imperium's most capable battlefield commanders. The successful defense of multiple hive cities against sustained Orc assault demonstrated that properly coordinated Imperial forces could resist even the most determined greenskin offensives. Yarek's role in this success earned him promotion to Lord Commissar, while cementing his position as the primary Imperial authority on anti-Orc warfare. The interwar period between the Second and Third Wars for Armageddon saw Yarek's influence extend across multiple sectors, as Imperial commanders sought his expertise for operations against Orc forces throughout the galaxy. His detailed analysis of greenskin tactics and psychology became required reading at Imperial Guard academies, while his innovations in urban warfare doctrine were incorporated into standard training programs. The Lord Commissar's reputation continued to grow through successful campaigns on worlds threatened by Orc incursions, each victory adding to the legend that surrounded his name. The return of Gozkul Mag Uruk Thraka to the Armageddon system in the year 998 of the 41st millennium marked the beginning of the Third War for Armageddon and the resumption of the personal rivalry between the Orc warboss and Lord Commissar Yarek. The scale of this second invasion dwarfed even the massive forces that had been deployed during the earlier conflict, with Gozkul commanding resources accumulated during decades of conquest across multiple sectors. The warboss had clearly learned from his previous encounter with Imperial defenses, arriving with improved equipment and tactical doctrines that addressed many of the weaknesses that had been exploited during the Second War. Yarek's preparation for the renewed Orc assault reflected his accumulated experience and understanding of greenskin capabilities developed over nearly 6 decades of anti-Orc operations. The defensive improvements implemented across Armageddon's hive cities incorporated lessons learned during the previous siege, while adapting to new threats posed by Gozkul's enhanced forces. The Steel Legion had been reinforced and re-equipped with improved weapons and vehicles, specifically designed for urban combat against Orc forces, creating a defensive capability that far exceeded what had been available during the earlier conflict. The tactical evolution demonstrated by both commanders during the Third War for Armageddon illustrated the unique relationship that had developed between these legendary adversaries over the intervening decades. Gozkul's forces employed increasingly sophisticated strategies that reflected the warboss's growing understanding of Imperial defensive methods, while Yarek's responses demonstrated his ability to anticipate and counter Orc innovations. This intellectual duel between commanders added a strategic dimension to the conflict that elevated it beyond simple attrition warfare. The mutual respect that developed between Yarek and Gozkul represented one of the most unusual relationships in Imperial military history, with both commanders acknowledging their opponent's capabilities while maintaining their determination to achieve victory. Orc prisoners captured during the Third War frequently expressed admiration for the Iron Man, who provided worthy opposition to their beloved warboss, while Imperial intelligence reports noted that Gozkul often spoke of Yarek as his greatest adversary. This respect never diminished their commitment to destroying each other, but it added a personal dimension to the conflict that influenced tactical decisions on both sides. The prolonged nature of the Third War for Armageddon tested both commanders' ability to sustain complex military operations over extended periods, while maintaining the morale and effectiveness of their forces. Yarek's leadership during this phase of the conflict demonstrated his evolution from a talented commissar into a strategic commander whose influence extended across entire sectors. His coordination of multiple Imperial Guard regiments, Space Marine chapters, and supporting forces required skills that went far beyond traditional commissarial training, establishing him as one of the Imperium's most capable military leaders. The Steel Legion's performance during the Third War validated the organizational and tactical innovations that Yarek had implemented during the interwar period, with the regiment demonstrating exceptional effectiveness in the type of prolonged urban warfare that characterized the Armageddon conflicts. Their integration of new equipment and tactics allowed them to maintain operational effectiveness despite the enormous scale and intensity of orc attacks, while their loyalty to Yarek provided the psychological foundation necessary for sustained resistance under extreme conditions. The paradox of Saifa's Kane presents one of the most fascinating case studies in the history of the Imperial Commissariat, representing a man whose self-proclaimed cowardice consistently manifested as exceptional heroism and tactical brilliance that saved countless Imperial lives across multiple theaters of war. Kane's own memoirs, discovered and compiled after his death by Inquisitor Amberley Vale, reveal a complex individual whose constant fear of death and obsession with personal survival somehow drove him to undertake the most dangerous missions and achieve victories that conventional courage might never have accomplished. His internal monologue, preserved in detailed personal journals, demonstrates a calculating mind that analyzed every situation for potential threats while simultaneously identifying opportunities that more traditionally brave officers might overlook. The psychological mechanisms underlying Kane's apparent cowardice created a unique form of tactical thinking that proved devastatingly effective against the Imperium's enemies. His constant assessment of personal risk forced him to develop comprehensive understanding of enemy capabilities, local political situations, and potential escape routes that provided crucial intelligence for military planning. Where other commissars might charge directly into combat situations, Kane's preference for careful preparation and multiple contingency plans often revealed enemy weaknesses or strategic opportunities that could be exploited with minimal risk to Imperial forces. His reputation for luck masked a systematic approach to threat assessment that consistently placed him in positions where heroic actions became the safest available options. The assignment to the Valhallan Ice Warriors represented the beginning of Kane's most documented service period, during which his partnership with Aide Jurgen would prove instrumental in numerous campaigns across the Eastern Fringe and beyond. The 597th Valhallan Regiment provided an ideal environment for Kane's particular talents, as their recruitment from the ice world of Valhalla had produced soldiers whose natural resilience and pragmatic attitudes complemented his analytical approach to warfare. Unlike regiments from more fanatical worlds whose troops might expect their commissar to lead suicidal charges, the Valhallans appreciated tactical competence and practical leadership that achieved objectives while preserving lives. The cultural background of Valhallan society had produced soldiers who understood that survival in harsh environments required careful planning and resource management rather than simple courage. This perspective aligned perfectly with Kane's instinctive approach to military problems, creating a command relationship based on mutual respect rather than fear-based compliance. The Valhallans quickly recognized that their commissar's cautious planning and thorough reconnaissance consistently led to successful missions with lower casualty rates than comparable operations conducted by other regiments. This practical appreciation for competence over bravado established the foundation for decades of effective cooperation. Jurgen's role as Kane's personal aide represented far more than simple administrative support, evolving into a partnership that enhanced both officers' effectiveness through complementary skills and absolute mutual loyalty. The aide's natural immunity to psychic influence, unknown to most observers including Kane himself, provided crucial protection against chaos, corruption, and alien mental attacks that might otherwise have compromised the Commissar's judgment. Jurgen's unassuming appearance and apparent incompetence in social situations masked exceptional combat skills and an intuitive understanding of his superiors' tactical preferences that allowed him to anticipate needs and provide support without explicit orders. The practical aspects of their partnership extended beyond combat operations to encompass intelligence gathering, investigation of suspicious activities, and coordination with other Imperial agencies operating in the same theaters. Jurgen's ability to blend into crowds and observe situations without drawing attention proved invaluable during undercover operations, while his mechanical aptitude with vehicles and equipment ensured that Kane always possessed reliable transportation and functioning gear. The aide's complete discretion regarding sensitive information and his absolute loyalty to Kane personally, rather than Imperial institutions in general, created a relationship of trust that proved essential during complex political situations. The Tau incursions that characterized much of the 597th Valhallan service record provided numerous opportunities for Kane to demonstrate his tactical acumen while revealing the limitations of conventional Imperial doctrine when facing technologically superior opponents. The Tau Empire's expansion into Imperial space during the late 41st millennium presented challenges that required adaptive thinking rather than simple application of established military procedures. Kane's natural inclination to study enemy capabilities and identify weaknesses proved particularly valuable against Tau forces, whose advanced technology and sophisticated tactics often overwhelmed Imperial commanders who relied on traditional approaches. The engagement on Gravelax demonstrated Kane's ability to coordinate with local Imperial forces while maintaining the independence necessary for effective commissarial function. The planet's strategic importance as a manufacturing center made it a prime target for Tau expansion, but the local planetary defense forces possessed neither the experience nor equipment necessary to resist advanced alien technology. Kane's intervention involved not only direct military action, but also political maneuvering to overcome jurisdictional disputes and resource allocation problems that threatened to undermine the defense effort before Tau forces could be engaged. The tactical innovations developed during anti-Tau operations reflected Kane's systematic approach to analyzing enemy weaknesses and developing countermeasures that exploited these vulnerabilities. Tau forces relied heavily on advanced technology and long-range firepower, but their doctrine emphasized avoiding close combat where Imperial forces possessed advantages in physical strength and melee weapons. Kane's recognition of this preference led to tactical plans that forced Tau units into close-quarters engagements, where Imperial Guard training and equipment proved superior despite overall technological disadvantages. The coordination with Space Marine forces during major Tau incursions required diplomatic skills that extended beyond normal commissarial training, as Kane worked to integrate Astartes' capabilities with Imperial Guard operations while managing the complex personalities and competing agendas of superhuman warriors. Space Marines possessed overwhelming combat capabilities, but often lacked patience for the detailed planning and political considerations that characterized effective Guard operations. Kane's ability to present tactical plans in ways that appealed to Space Marine preferences for direct action while achieving broader strategic objectives proved crucial for successful joint operations. The investigation of chaos cults within Imperial territories represented another area where Kane's analytical abilities and partnership with Jurgen proved exceptionally valuable. Unlike external threats that could be addressed through conventional military operations, chaos corruption required careful investigation to identify the extent of infiltration and determine appropriate responses. Kane's natural paranoia and constant assessment of personal threats made him particularly effective at recognizing signs of heretical activity that might be overlooked by more trusting officers. The cult activities on Adumbria provided a typical example of the complex investigations that characterized much of Kane's career, involving multiple layers of conspiracy that extended from local criminal organizations to planetary government officials. The initial signs of chaos corruption appeared as routine criminal activity that might normally be handled by local law enforcement, but Kane's investigation revealed connections to off-world smuggling operations and heretical religious movements that threatened the entire sector's stability. The systematic approach to gathering evidence and building cases against suspected cultists required patience and attention to detail that contrasted sharply with conventional military operations. The identification of chaos corruption within imperial institutions presented particular challenges that tested Kane's ability to navigate complex political situations while maintaining operational security. Suspected cultists in positions of authority could compromise investigations if alerted prematurely, but allowing corruption to spread unchecked risked far greater damage to imperial interests. Kane's approach typically involved careful documentation of evidence while building networks of trusted contacts who could provide intelligence without alerting potential conspirators to the ongoing investigation. The coordination with Inquisition representatives during major cult investigations required careful balance between commissarial independence and recognition of superior authority in matters involving heresy and chaos corruption. Inquisitors possessed ultimate authority over heresy cases, but often lacked detailed knowledge of local conditions and military capabilities that proved crucial for successful operations. Kane's ability to provide valuable intelligence and tactical support while avoiding conflicts over jurisdiction created working relationships that benefited all parties involved. The Tyranid infiltrations that increasingly threatened imperial worlds during Kane's later career presented entirely different challenges that required adaptation of investigation techniques developed for human opponents. Unlike chaos cults whose activities followed recognizable patterns of human behavior, Tyranid infiltration involved alien psychology and biological processes that defied conventional analysis. The presence of genestealer cults created hybrid populations whose loyalty to the Tyranid hive mind overrode all human considerations, making them far more dangerous than typical heretical organizations. The detection of genestealer influence required recognition of subtle behavioral changes and biological markers that might indicate alien contamination within human populations. Kane's systematic approach to threat assessment proved valuable for identifying these indicators, but the investigation of suspected infiltration sites required extreme caution to avoid alerting hybrid populations to imperial awareness of their presence. The discovery of genestealer activity typically triggered immediate military responses rather than prolonged investigations, as the alien threat could spread rapidly if not contained quickly. The combat operations against established genestealer cults tested every aspect of Imperial Guard training and equipment, as hybrid forces possessed advantages in both physical capabilities and intimate knowledge of local terrain and infrastructure. Kane's tactical planning for these operations emphasized speed and overwhelming force to prevent cult members from dispersing into civilian populations where they could continue their infiltration activities. The coordination of multiple Imperial agencies during major purge operations required careful attention to operational security and precise timing to achieve maximum effectiveness. The documentation of these various campaigns in Kane's personal memoirs provided unprecedented insight into the daily realities of commissarial service from the perspective of an individual officer rather than official military histories. His detailed observations about enemy tactics, imperial bureaucracy, and the psychological pressures of extended military service created a valuable resource for understanding the human elements of galactic warfare. The candid nature of his private writings revealed aspects of military life that were rarely acknowledged in official reports, including the political maneuvering, resource shortages, and interpersonal conflicts that influenced operational effectiveness. The The posthumous publication of the Kane Archive by Inquisitor Amberley Vale represented a significant departure from traditional imperial policy regarding classified military information. Vale's decision to compile and edit Kane's memoirs for distribution to commissarial training facilities reflected her recognition that the practical insights contained in these documents could improve the effectiveness of future political officers. The extensive annotations and additional documentation provided by the Inquisitor created a comprehensive resource that combined personal experience with strategic analysis and historical context. The impact of the Kane Archive on commissariat doctrine and training proved substantial, as instructors at Schola Progenium facilities incorporated Kane's tactical innovations and investigative techniques into their curricula. The realistic portrayal of military life and the challenges faced by individual commissars provided valuable preparation for officers who would face similar situations during their own careers. The emphasis on analytical thinking and careful planning, rather than simple courage, offered alternative approaches to traditional commissarial methods that proved particularly effective in complex operational environments. The training modifications implemented following publication of the archive included enhanced instruction in investigation techniques, coordination with other imperial agencies, and tactical flexibility when facing non-human opponents. These changes reflected recognition that modern commissars required broader skill sets than their predecessors who had operated primarily against human enemies in conventional military situations. The increasing complexity of threats facing the Imperium demanded officers capable of adapting their methods to diverse challenges while maintaining the core competencies that defined effective political oversight. The psychological insights provided by Kane's memoirs influenced approaches to maintaining mental health and operational effectiveness among commissars serving in high-stress environments for extended periods. His frank discussions of fear, doubt, and the psychological toll of making life and death decisions provided valuable perspective for officers struggling with similar challenges. The recognition that even legendary figures experienced these difficulties helped normalize psychological support services and encouraged more open discussion of mental health issues within the commissariat. The diversification of imperial military forces across the galaxy's countless theaters of war has necessitated the development of specialized commissarial branches that address the unique challenges presented by elite formations, naval operations, penal units, and planetary defense forces. Each branch requires distinct training regimens, modified equipment, and specialized tactical doctrines that adapt core commissarial principles to specific operational environments while maintaining the fundamental authority structures that define political oversight within imperial forces. The Tempestus Scions represent the pinnacle of Imperial Guard training and equipment, recruited from the most promising graduates of Schola Progenium facilities, and subjected to additional conditioning that transforms them into elite special operations forces capable of undertaking the most dangerous missions across hostile territories. Commissars assigned to these formations undergo extensive additional training that prepares them for the unique psychological and tactical challenges of leading soldiers, whose capabilities often exceed those of conventional Imperial Guard units. The selection process for Tempestus Commissars requires not only exceptional performance during standard Schola Progenium training, but also demonstration of the analytical thinking and tactical flexibility necessary for special operations environments. The enhanced training regimen for Tempestus Commissars encompasses specialized instruction in airborne operations, deep reconnaissance techniques, and coordination with other elite Imperial forces, including Space Marine chapters and Inquisition assets. These officers learn to operate independently for extended periods without support from conventional command structures, making critical decisions based on incomplete intelligence while maintaining communication with higher authorities through encrypted channels that may be monitored by hostile forces. The psychological conditioning required for this level of independence differs significantly from standard commissarial training, emphasizing initiative and adaptability rather than rigid adherence to established procedures. The equipment modifications provided to Tempestus Commissars reflect both their elite status and the specialized nature of their operational requirements. Their carapace armor incorporates advanced life support systems, enhanced communication equipment, and integrated weapon systems that provide capabilities unavailable to conventional commissars. The armor's power systems support additional equipment, including advanced medical systems, environmental controls, and emergency beacons that function independently of external power sources. The distinctive helmet design includes enhanced optical systems and threat detection capabilities that allow these officers to function effectively in environments where conventional equipment would prove inadequate. The weapons carried by Tempestus Commissars typically include modified bolt pistols with enhanced targeting systems, improved ammunition capacity, and reduced sound signatures that support covert operations. Their close combat weapons often incorporate power field generators or molecular disruption technology that provides superior effectiveness against heavily armored opponents. The selection and maintenance of specialized equipment becomes a crucial skill for these officers, as equipment failure during deep penetration missions could compromise entire operations and result in the loss of irreplaceable personnel. The tactical doctrine employed by Tempestus formations requires commissars who understand both conventional military operations and the specialized techniques necessary for successful special operations. These officers must coordinate airborne insertions, establish communication with resistance movements, and conduct precision strikes against high-value targets while maintaining the discipline and loyalty that defines effective Imperial forces. The balance between operational flexibility and ideological purity becomes particularly challenging when working with local populations whose loyalty to Imperial doctrine may be questionable. The coordination with other elite Imperial forces represents a crucial aspect of Tempestus Commissar training, as these officers frequently work alongside Space Marine forces, Inquisition operatives, and specialized Imperial Navy units during complex multi-service operations. The ability to integrate Tempestus capabilities with these diverse forces requires understanding of different operational doctrines, command structures, and tactical preferences while maintaining the independence necessary for effective political oversight. These coordination skills prove particularly valuable during planetary liberation campaigns, where multiple Imperial agencies must work together despite competing priorities and jurisdictional boundaries. Naval commissars face entirely different challenges as they serve aboard Imperial Navy vessels, where the enclosed environment, complex technical systems, and unique culture of void-born crews create conditions that differ fundamentally from planetary-based military operations. The assignment to naval service requires extensive additional training in void warfare, ship operations, and the specialized psychology of crews who may spend decades without setting foot on planetary surfaces. These commissars must understand the intricate relationships between different shipboard departments while maintaining their authority over personnel whose technical expertise often exceeds their own. The void-born crews that staff Imperial Navy vessels develop cultural attitudes and social structures that reflect their unique environment, with family lineages often serving aboard the same ships for multiple generations and developing loyalties that may conflict with broader Imperial interests. Naval commissars must navigate these complex relationships while ensuring that crew loyalty remains focused on the Emperor rather than local traditions or personal relationships that might compromise operational effectiveness. The identification of potential problems requires subtle observation techniques that gather intelligence without disrupting the delicate social balance necessary for effective ship operations. The technical complexity of Imperial Navy vessels creates numerous opportunities for sabotage or incompetence that could compromise entire fleets during critical operations. Naval commissars must develop sufficient understanding of ship systems to recognize when technical problems result from deliberate sabotage, inadequate maintenance, or simple equipment failure. This knowledge requires extensive study of imperial technology and close cooperation with tech priests and other technical specialists who maintain the complex systems that enable void travel and combat operations. The coordination with ship's officers represents one of the most challenging aspects of naval commissarial service, as these relationships must balance respect for technical expertise with maintenance of political authority over personnel whose decisions directly affect ship safety and operational effectiveness. Naval officers typically possess decades of experience and specialized knowledge that commissars cannot match, creating situations where political oversight must be exercised without undermining the technical competence necessary for successful void operations. The most effective naval commissars learn to present their authority as complementary to rather than competitive with technical leadership. The unique environment of void warfare creates psychological stresses that differ significantly from planetary combat, as crews must function effectively while sealed inside metal hulls surrounded by the vacuum of space. The constant awareness of potential catastrophic decompression, radiation exposure, and the vast distances that separate ships from any possibility of rescue creates mental pressures that require different approaches to morale maintenance and discipline. Naval commissars must recognize signs of psychological breakdown that manifest differently in void environments, while developing techniques for maintaining crew effectiveness during extended voyages. The coordination between naval and ground forces during planetary assault operations requires naval commissars to serve as liaison officers who facilitate communication between ship-based command structures and planetary military formations. This role involves translating between different tactical doctrines, coordinating fire support missions, and ensuring that naval assets provide appropriate support for ground operations without compromising their own defensive capabilities. The timing and precision required for effective naval gunfire support demands close cooperation between commissars serving in both environments. Penal Legion commissars face perhaps the most challenging assignment within the entire commissariat structure, as they must maintain discipline and operational effectiveness among soldiers who have been condemned to death and offer the opportunity to redeem themselves through service to the Emperor. These formations consist entirely of criminals, traitors, and other undesirables whose loyalty to imperial institutions remains questionable at best. The psychological dynamics of leading condemned soldiers require specialized techniques that balance the expectation of expendability with the practical need to maintain unit cohesion during combat operations. The recruitment process for Penal Legion formations draws from planetary prisons, military stockades, and civilian populations whose crimes warrant death sentences, but whose physical capabilities suggest potential military value. These individuals arrive at Penal Legion facilities with established patterns of criminal behavior, resistance to authority, and psychological damage that makes them unsuitable for conventional military service. Commissars assigned to these formations must develop techniques for channeling criminal instincts toward legitimate military objectives while preventing the spread of corruption to other imperial forces. The discipline methods employed within Penal Legions differ significantly from conventional commissarial approaches, as traditional motivational techniques prove ineffective with soldiers who already face death sentences and have little to lose through continued misbehavior. The use of explosive collar devices, constant surveillance, and immediate execution for infractions creates an environment where survival depends entirely on following orders and demonstrating value through combat effectiveness. Penal Legion commissars must balance these harsh measures with practical recognition that excessive brutality can trigger desperate resistance that compromises operational objectives. The tactical employment of Penal Legion forces requires careful consideration of their expendable nature while maximizing their potential contribution to broader military objectives. These formations typically receive assignments involving extremely high casualty rates, such as frontal assaults against heavily fortified positions or reconnaissance missions in areas where conventional forces would face unacceptable losses. The challenge for Commissars involves ensuring that these sacrificial missions achieve legitimate military objectives rather than simply disposing of unwanted personnel without strategic benefit. The psychological preparation of condemned soldiers for suicide missions requires techniques that differ fundamentally from conventional military motivation, as these individuals must be convinced to fight effectively despite understanding that survival is unlikely. Some penal legion commissars emphasize the possibility of redemption through heroic death, while others focus on practical considerations such as improved rations or reduced surveillance for soldiers who demonstrate reliability. The most effective approaches typically combine multiple motivational techniques while maintaining constant vigilance for signs of mutiny or desertion. The coordination with conventional imperial forces during joint operations presents significant challenges, as regular troops may refuse to cooperate with condemned criminals or may attempt to use penal legion forces as expendable assets without regard for tactical effectiveness. Penal legion commissars must protect their formations from exploitation by other imperial commanders, while ensuring that criminal soldiers do not contaminate regular forces through contact or example. This balance requires constant negotiation and careful management of inter-unit relationships. Planetary Defense Force commissars encounter unique challenges when working with locally recruited formations, whose training, equipment, and cultural backgrounds vary enormously across the Imperium's countless worlds. Unlike Imperial Guard regiments that undergo standardized training and receive uniform equipment, PDF forces reflect local conditions and resources that may bear little resemblance to established Imperial military doctrine. Commissars assigned to these formations must adapt their methods to accommodate vast differences in military capability while maintaining Imperial standards of discipline and loyalty. The quality of planetary defense forces ranges from highly professional formations equipped with advanced weaponry to barely trained militia armed with primitive weapons and lacking basic military knowledge. Commissars must assess the capabilities of their assigned forces and develop training programs that improve military effectiveness without attempting to impose standards that exceed local resources or cultural understanding. This adaptation requires flexibility in methods while maintaining absolute consistency in fundamental principles of loyalty and obedience to imperial authority. The local recruitment patterns that characterize PDF formations create complex loyalty issues that require careful management by assigned commissars. Soldiers recruited from local populations maintain family ties, cultural connections, and economic interests that may conflict with imperial military requirements during crisis situations. The identification and management of these competing loyalties requires intimate knowledge of local conditions combined with careful observation of individual soldiers, whose personal circumstances might compromise their reliability during critical operations. The integration of PDF forces with Imperial Guard regiments during major military operations presents significant challenges related to differences in training standards, equipment compatibility, and tactical doctrine. PDF formations may lack the mobility, firepower, or communication capabilities necessary for effective coordination with professional Imperial forces, requiring commissars to serve as liaison officers who facilitate cooperation between units with vastly different capabilities. The successful integration of these diverse forces often determines the outcome of planetary defense operations. The maintenance of imperial standards among locally recruited forces requires constant vigilance against the gradual erosion of discipline and doctrine that can occur when PDF formations operate in isolation from broader imperial military structures. Local traditions, cultural practices, and political influences may slowly compromise imperial standards if not actively countered by effective commissarial oversight. The challenge involves identifying and addressing these influences before they become entrenched within unit culture and begin affecting operational effectiveness. The training programs developed for PDF improvement must account for local educational levels, available resources, and cultural factors that influence learning effectiveness, while ensuring that essential imperial military principles are properly understood and implemented. Commissars often find themselves serving as instructors who must communicate complex military concepts to soldiers whose backgrounds provide little preparation for professional military service. The development of appropriate training methods requires understanding of local psychology combined with expertise in imperial military doctrine. The catastrophic emergence of the Great Rift in the early years of the 42nd millennium fundamentally transformed the operational environment for commissars across the galaxy, creating challenges that exceeded anything encountered during the previous 10,000 years of imperial history. The massive warp storm that bisected the galaxy severed communication, links between Terra and vast swathes of imperial territory, leaving commissars operating in the Imperium nihilist to function with unprecedented independence from higher authority, while maintaining discipline among forces that witnessed daily proof of the Imperium's apparent fragmentation. The psychological impact of seeing the galaxy literally torn apart created morale crises that tested every technique developed for maintaining Imperial loyalty during desperate circumstances. The communication blackouts that characterized the immediate aftermath of the Great Rift's formation forced fundamental changes in commissarial doctrine, as officers found themselves unable to receive guidance from the Adeptus Militarum or report their activities to superior authorities. Standard procedures that relied on regular contact with sector command structures became impossible to maintain, requiring commissars to make critical decisions based on their training and judgment rather than explicit orders from higher echelons. This independence, while consistent with traditional commissarial authority, operated on a scale that challenged the institutional frameworks that had sustained the organization for millennia. The astropathic communications that did penetrate the warp storms often arrived fragmented or delayed by months, creating situations where commissars received outdated intelligence about strategic situations that had already evolved beyond recognition. The reliability of these communications remained questionable, as the chaotic warp energies surrounding the Great Rift could corrupt or alter messages in ways that made them actively dangerous to follow. Experienced commissars learned to evaluate incoming communications for signs of corruption or manipulation, while developing independent intelligence networks that provided more reliable information about local conditions. The emergence of new chaos threats following the Great Rift's formation required rapid adaptation of anti-heresy techniques that had been developed for more conventional forms of corruption. The massive influx of warp energy into real space created opportunities for demon manifestations, possession incidents, and reality distortions that exceeded the scope of traditional chaos cult activities. Commissars found themselves dealing with entire populations that had been exposed to warp energies, creating corruption patterns that spread through communities rather than following the typical cell structures of organized heretical movements. The identification of warp-tainted individuals became increasingly complex as exposure to chaotic energies produced symptoms that ranged from obvious physical mutations to subtle behavioral changes that might not manifest for months after initial contact. Standard interrogation techniques proved inadequate for detecting corruption that operated below the threshold of conscious awareness, requiring commissars to develop new methods for identifying compromised personnel before they could spread their taint to other members of their units. The psychological stress of constant vigilance against an invisible enemy that could manifest anywhere created additional challenges for maintaining unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. The demon incursions that became commonplace following the Great Rift's emergence required tactical responses that differed fundamentally from conventional military operations against physical enemies. Demons possessed capabilities that violated natural laws and could appear anywhere without regard for defensive perimeters or strategic positions, making traditional defensive strategies ineffective. Commissars had to learn techniques for combating entities that were immune to conventional weapons, while coordinating with specialized Imperial forces, including Grey Knights and Inquisition demon hunters, whose methods often conflicted with standard military doctrine. The reality distortions that accompanied major demon manifestations created environments where normal physics ceased to function reliably, forcing Commissars to maintain discipline among troops who witnessed impossible events that challenged their understanding of the universe. Soldiers who observed time flowing backward, gravity reversing direction, or solid matter transforming into living creatures required immediate psychological support to prevent complete mental breakdown. The techniques for maintaining morale under these circumstances had to be developed through trial and error, as no existing training could prepare officers for the systematic violation of reality itself. The integration with Primaris Space Marine forces represented another significant challenge for Commissars who found themselves working alongside Adeptus Astartes formations for the first time in their careers. The arrival of these new Space Marine variants during the Indomitus Crusade created complex diplomatic situations, as Commissars attempted to coordinate with superhuman warriors whose capabilities far exceeded those of conventional Imperial Guard units. The traditional independence that characterized commissarial authority came into conflict with Space Marine command structures that operated according to different organizational principles and tactical doctrines. The psychological impact of working alongside Primaris Marines created both opportunities and challenges for maintaining discipline within Imperial Guard formations. Soldiers who witnessed the superhuman capabilities of Astartes warriors often experienced improved morale and confidence in ultimate victory, but they could also develop feelings of inadequacy or resentment toward their own perceived limitations. Commissars had to balance the inspirational value of Space Marine presence against the risk that ordinary soldiers might lose confidence in their own abilities or begin questioning why they were required to undertake dangerous missions when superhuman alternatives were available. The tactical coordination between Imperial Guard and Primaris forces required Commissars to serve as liaison officers who facilitated communication between organizations with vastly different operational capabilities and strategic perspectives. Space Marines typically focused on rapid, decisive actions that achieved strategic objectives through overwhelming force, while Imperial Guard doctrine emphasized sustained operations that gradually wore down enemy resistance through attrition. The integration of these different approaches required careful planning and constant communication to prevent conflicts that could compromise overall mission effectiveness. The diplomatic complexities of working with Space Marine commanders tested commissarial skills in ways that had not been anticipated during their training. Astartes officers possessed centuries of combat experience and genetic modifications that enhanced their tactical judgment, creating situations where Commissars had to provide political oversight to individuals whose military competence clearly exceeded their own. The balance between maintaining Imperial Guard independence and recognizing Space Marine expertise required delicate negotiation that could influence the success or failure of entire campaigns. The expanded Xenos threats that emerged during the era Indomitus forced rapid evolution in commissarial doctrine, as alien species exploited the chaos surrounding the Great Rift to launch major incursions into Imperial territory. The Tau Empire's Fourth Sphere expansion took advantage of Imperial distraction to capture significant territories, while Orc-Waz grew to unprecedented sizes as greenskin populations were energized by the galaxy-wide conflict. Tyranid hive fleets continued their relentless advance toward Terra, their progress accelerated by the reduced Imperial response capabilities in affected sectors. The anti-Tau operations that characterized much of the Eastern Fringe required Commissars to adapt their methods for combating an enemy that combined advanced technology with sophisticated propaganda techniques designed to undermine Imperial loyalty. Tau Watercast diplomats actively recruited human populations through promises of technological advancement and social equality that appealed to civilians suffering under Imperial rule. Commissars had to develop counter-propaganda techniques that addressed these appeals while maintaining loyalty among troops who witnessed Tau technological superiority in direct combat. The psychological warfare aspects of Tau expansion created particular challenges for maintaining morale among Imperial forces, who faced enemies equipped with weapons and equipment that clearly exceeded Imperial capabilities. Soldiers who observed Tau battlesuits defeating Imperial armor or witnessed the efficiency of Tau logistics and medical care required constant reinforcement of Imperial doctrine to prevent defection or surrender. The techniques for maintaining fighting spirit against technologically superior opponents had to emphasize spiritual and ideological advantages while acknowledging practical disadvantages that could not be ignored. The coordination with local resistance movements in Tau-occupied territories required commissars to work with civilian populations whose loyalty had been compromised through exposure to Tau ideology. These collaborators might provide valuable intelligence about Tau positions and capabilities, but their reliability remained questionable due to their previous cooperation with alien occupiers. The evaluation of potential allies required careful assessment of individual motivations while maintaining operational security that prevented compromise of Imperial operations. The Orc threats that proliferated during the era Indomitus reached scales that exceeded even the massive wars of previous millennia, with some greenskin concentrations achieving sizes that threatened entire sectors rather than individual worlds. The psychological effects of Orc victories during the chaotic period following the Great Rift's emergence had energized greenskin populations across the galaxy, creating a cascade effect that generated increasingly powerful warbosses and more sophisticated Orc technology. Commissars found themselves facing Orc forces that possessed capabilities and organization levels that challenged established assumptions about greenskin limitations. The evolution of Orc tactics during major wars required rapid adaptation of anti-greenskin techniques that had been developed during previous conflicts. Some Orc forces demonstrated strategic planning capabilities that exceeded anything previously documented, while others employed advanced technology that suggested significant development in Orc engineering capabilities. The traditional reliance on Orc disorganization and infighting as factors that limited their effectiveness proved inadequate when facing wars that maintained cohesion over extended periods and vast distances. The Tyranid advances that continued throughout the era Indomitus presented existential threats that required coordination between multiple Imperial agencies and the deployment of resources on scales that strained the Imperium's reduced capabilities. The appearance of new Tyranid bioforms and the evolution of hive fleet tactics that incorporated lessons learned from previous encounters with Imperial forces created challenges that exceeded the scope of conventional military responses. Commissars working in areas threatened by Tyranid advance had to maintain morale among populations that understood they faced potential extinction rather than mere conquest. The Genestealer cult activities that preceded major Tyranid incursions became increasingly sophisticated as hybrid populations learned from previous Imperial responses and developed improved methods for avoiding detection. The identification of cult activity required enhanced investigation techniques that could penetrate deeper levels of infiltration while distinguishing between genuine corruption and the paranoia that naturally developed in populations facing existential threats. The balance between necessary vigilance and destructive suspicion required careful management to prevent Imperial forces from destroying themselves through excessive internal conflict. The doctrinal evolution that characterized commissarial adaptation during the era Indomitus reflected both the changing nature of threats facing the Imperium and the practical lessons learned through years of operating with reduced support from higher authorities. The traditional emphasis on rigid adherence to established procedures gave way to greater tactical flexibility that allowed individual commissars to adapt their methods to local conditions while maintaining core principles of loyalty and discipline. This evolution represented a fundamental shift in commissarial culture that acknowledged the reality of operating in an increasingly fragmented galaxy. The enhanced independence granted to individual commissars during the era Indomitus created opportunities for innovation and tactical development that had been constrained by previous bureaucratic structures. Officers who demonstrated competence and loyalty received expanded authority to make strategic decisions that would previously have required approval from sector-level authorities. This delegation of responsibility allowed for more rapid responses to developing threats while placing greater emphasis on individual judgment and initiative. The integration of new technologies and tactics developed during the Indomitus Crusade required systematic evaluation and adaptation by commissars who had to determine which innovations supported imperial doctrine and which represented dangerous deviations from established principles. The introduction of Primaris Space Marine equipment, new Imperial Guard vehicle designs, and enhanced communication systems all required assessment for their impact on traditional command structures and disciplinary methods. The training modifications implemented during the era Indomitus reflected the expanded scope of challenges that modern commissars were expected to address during their careers. Enhanced instruction in anti-demon techniques, coordination with Space Marine forces, and advanced investigation methods became standard components of Schola Progenium curricula. The emphasis on tactical flexibility and independent decision-making represented a significant departure from previous training that had prioritized adherence to established procedures above individual initiative. The era Indomitus has fundamentally transformed the Imperial Commissariat from a rigid bureaucratic institution into a more flexible organization capable of adapting to the unprecedented challenges of a galaxy torn apart by the Great Rift. While maintaining their core mission of ensuring loyalty and discipline within Imperial forces, modern commissars operate with greater independence and broader authority than their predecessors, reflecting the practical necessities of governing an empire where communication with central authority may be impossible for years at a time. The success of these adaptations will ultimately determine whether the Commissariat can continue to serve as the backbone of imperial military discipline in an age where the very foundations of the Imperium face constant threat from enemies both within and without. As the galaxy burns and the Emperor's light struggles against the encroaching darkness, the Commissars stand as humanity's last guardians of faith and order, their bolt pistols ready to enforce the ultimate sanction against any who would falter in their duty to the Golden Throne.